Evangeline, a Tale of Alcadi by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Edited with introduction, notes, and a plan of study. By W. F. Conover. A. Flanagan Company, Publishers, Chicago. Copyright 1899 by W. F. Conover. Note: the distinctive feature of this edition of Evangeline is the plan of study which forms the latter part of the volume. This plan for the study of Evangeline is the outgrowth of several years' teaching of this delightful poem. It has proved successful in securing very satisfactory work from classes varying greatly in ability. It has resulted, in a considerable majority of cases, in 1. In awakening an interest in and a love for good literature, 2. Opening up the field of literature in a new way, and showing that much wealth may be gotten by digging below the surface, 3. Developing a considerable power of discrimination, 4. Enlarging the pupil's working vocabulary. See Argument, on page 113. The Author. Introduction. The Author 7. The poem 9. Acadia and the Acadians 12. Evangeline, a Tale of Alcadi. Part the first 20. Part the second 60. Notes on Evangeline. Part 1 107. Part 2 110. A plan of study. Part 1 119. Part 2 124. Part 3 142. Introduction. The Author. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was born in Portland, Maine, February 27, 1807. His father and mother were of English stock, his mother being a descendant of John Alden and Priscilla. Stephen Longfellow, his father, was a lawyer and statesman. Henry's school life began at the age of 3. When he was 6 years old he could read, spell, and multiply, and at the age of 7 was halfway through his Latin grammar. He early showed a taste for reading, and read not only his father's small stock of books, but frequented the Portland Library and bookstores. The Battle of Lovell's Pond was his first poem, written when he was 13. He entered Bowdoin College at the age of 14, graduating in 1825. During the latter part of his student life there he began to show a considerable literary bent. Shortly after graduating from Bowdoin, Longfellow was elected professor of modern languages in that institution. Before entering upon his work, he spent 3 years in study and travel in Europe, returning to America in 1829. For 5½ years he taught in Bowdoin, during which time he began serious work as an author. In 1834, Harvard called him to the chair of modern languages. He again made a trip to Europe for further study. Longfellow was connected with Harvard for 19 years, resigning his position in 1854 to devote his whole time to literature. His two principal prose works are Outre-mer and Hyperion. The latter was followed by a volume of poems entitled Voices of the Night. Ballads and Other Poems appeared in 1841 and showed much more talent. Evangeline was written in 1847, Hiawatha in 1855, and The Courtship of Miles Standish in 1857. Evangeline and Hiawatha are considered the best of his longer poems. The Building of the Ship and Excelsior are perhaps the best known of his shorter poems. Longfellow died at Cambridge in 1882. The poem Evangeline is considered Longfellow's masterpiece among his longer poems. It is said to have been the author's favorite. It has a universal popularity, having been translated into many languages. E.C. Stedman styles it the flower of American idyls. Evangeline is a narrative poem, since it tells a story. Some of the world's greatest poems have been of this kind, notably the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer and the Aeneid of Virgil. It may be also classified as an idyll, which is a simple, pastoral poem of no great length. Poetry has been defined as impassioned expression in verse or metrical form. All modern English poetry has meter, and much of it rhyme. By meter is meant a regular recurrence of accented syllables among unaccented syllables. Evangeline is written in what is called hexameter, having 6 accents to the line. An accented syllable is followed by 1 or 2 unaccented. A line must begin with an accented syllable, the last accent but one be followed by 2 unaccented syllables, and the last by 1. representing an accented syllable by O and an unaccented syllable by A dash. The first line of the poem would be as follows. Oh, 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 this is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlocks. The measure lends itself easily to the lingering melancholy which marks a greater part of the poem. In reading there should be a gentle labor of the former half of the line and gentle acceleration of the latter half. Scudder. Illustration, Nova Scotia and vicinity. Acadia and the Acadians. Acadia, now known as Nova Scotia, was settled by the French in 1607. Many of the colonists settled in the fertile region about the Bay of Minas, an arm of the Bay of Fundy. One of these settlements was called Grand Pré, meaning Great Meadow. The people were industrious and thrifty, and they soon attained a considerable prosperity. During the early period of American history, France and England were almost continually at war with one another, and in these wars the colonists were concerned. At the close of what is known as Queen Anne's War, in 1713, France ceded Acadia to the English, and it has since remained in their possession. Some 35 years passed before an English settlement was made at Halifax, the Acadians in the meantime remaining in undisturbed possession of the country. Soon after the settlement of Halifax, trouble began between the rival colonists. The Acadians were, as a whole, a quiet and peaceable people, content to till their farms and let the mother country settle any disputes. Some of them were not thus minded, and they succeeded in causing considerable trouble. Frequent attacks were made upon Halifax by the Indians, who were supposed to have been aided and encouraged by the Acadians. The Acadians had refused to take the oath of allegiance to the English, and this caused them to be regarded with suspicion and fear. They had sworn fidelity on the condition that they should not be required to bear arms against the French, with whom they naturally sympathized, being of the same blood and religion. They persistently refused to go further and swear allegiance. The English were not without blame, since it must be admitted they had covetous eyes upon the rich farms of the Acadians, and an opportunity to take possession of them would not be unwelcome. Illustration, Map of Annapolis and King's Counties. The strife that had so long been going on between France and England to determine which should rule in the New World was now at a critical point. England's power seemed to be trembling in the balance. Her defeat meant great disaster to the colonies. Alarmed by Braddock's failure, the colonists determined something must be done to prevent the Acadians giving assistance to the French. To send them to Canada would be to strengthen the enemy, while to transport them to any one of the colonies would be equally unwise, since they would there be a source of danger. It was finally decided to scatter them among the different settlements. An order was issued requiring all the males of Grand Pré and vicinity 10 years old and upwards to assemble in the church to hear a proclamation of the king. Failure to attend would result in a forfeiture of all property of the individual. On the appointed day the men gathered in the church and heard the mandate directing that all their property, excepting household goods and money, should be forfeited to the crown, and they with their families should be transported to other lands. They were held prisoners until the time of sailing, the women and the children gathering their belongings on the beach. The expected transports failed to arrive on time, and fear of trouble led the English to hurry their prisoners aboard the few ships in the harbor. These were so crowded nearly all the goods had to be left behind, and in the haste of embarking many families, lovers and friends were parted, being carried aboard different ships bound for different ports. On October 29, 1755, the Acadians sailed away into exile, an exile without an end, and without an example in story. There is a considerable difference of opinion as to whether such extreme measures were justified. The English colonists evidently felt that it was a necessary act, an act of self-preservation. It is, perhaps, no worse than many of the horrors of war. On the other hand, the Acadians had, as a whole, committed no overt act of disloyalty, though a few of them had done so. Should a whole community thus suffer for the wrongdoing of a few? This is certainly a difficult question. Those interested in the subject should read an article by Parkman in Harper's Magazine for November, 1884, where he justifies the action. For the opposite view, see Acadia, by Edward Richards, Volume 1, Chapter 4. The following quotations will be found of interest. The first is from Edward Richards, the second and third from two of contemporaries of the exiled Acadians, Moses de les Derniers and Brooke Watson. All that vast bay, around which but lately an industrious people worked like a swarm of bees, was now deserted. In the silent village, where the doors swung idly in the wind, nothing was heard but the tramp of soldiery and the lowing of cattle, wandering anxiously around the stables as if looking for their masters. The total amount of livestock owned by the Acadians at the time of the deportation has been variously estimated by different historians, or to speak more correctly, very few have paid any attention to this subject. Rameau, who has made a much deeper study than any other historian of the Acadians, sets the total at 130,000, comprising horned cattle, horses, sheep, and pigs. Edward Richard quotes the following from two contemporaries of the exiled Acadians. The Acadians were the most innocent and virtuous people I have ever known or read of in any history. They lived in a state of perfect equality, without distinction of rank in society. The title of Mr. was unknown among them. Knowing nothing of luxury, or even the conveniences of life, they were content with a simple manner of living, which they easily compassed by the tillage of their lands. Very little ambition or avarice was to be seen among them. They anticipated each other's wants by kindly liberality. They demanded no interest for loans of money or other property. They were humane and hospitable to strangers, and very liberal toward those who embraced their religion. They were very remarkable for their inviolable purity of morals. If any disputes arose in their transactions, they always submitted to the decision of an arbitrator, and their final appeal was to their priest. Moses de les Derniers. Young men were not encouraged to marry unless the young girl could weave a piece of cloth, and the young man make a pair of wheels. These accomplishments were deemed essential for their marriage settlement, and they hardly needed anything else, for every time there was a wedding the whole village contributed to set up the newly married couple. They built a house for them, and cleared enough land for their immediate needs. They gave them livestock and poultry, and nature, seconded by their own labor, soon put them in a position to help others. Brooke Watson. Illustration: Village of Grand Prix. Rivers Gaspereau and Avon in the distance. Evangeline. Prelude. This is the forest primeval. The murmuring pines and the hemlocks, bearded with moss, and in garments green, indistinct in the twilight, stand like druids of Eld, with voices sad and prophetic, stand like harpers hoar, with beards that rest on their bosoms. Loud from its rocky caverns, the deep-voiced neighboring ocean five speaks, and in accents disconsolate answers the wail of the forest. This is the forest primeval. But where are the hearts that beneath it leap like the roe, when he hears in the woodland the voice of the huntsman? Where is the thatch-roofed village, the home of Acadian farmers, men whose lives glided on like rivers that water the woodlands, darkened by shadows of earth, but reflecting an image of heaven? Waste are those pleasant farms, and the farmers forever departed, scattered like dust and leaves, when the mighty blasts of October seize them, and whirl them aloft, and sprinkle them far o'er the ocean. Naught but tradition remains of the beautiful village of Grand Prix. 15 Ye who believe in affection that hopes, and endures, and is patient, ye who believe in the beauty and strength of woman's devotion. List to the mournful tradition still sung by the pines of the forest. List to a tale of love in Acadie, home of the happy. Part the First. Section 1. In the Acadian land, on the shores of the basin of Minas, 20 distant, secluded still, the little village of Grand Prix lay in the fruitful valley. Vast meadows stretched to the eastward, giving the village its name and pasture to flocks without number. Dikes, that the hands of the farmers had raised with labor incessant, shut out the turbulent tides. But at stated seasons the floodgates 25 opened and welcomed the sea to wander at will o'er the meadows. West and south there were fields of flax, and orchards and cornfields spreading afar and unfenced o'er the plain, and away to the northward Blomidon rose, and the forests old, and aloft on the mountains sea fogs pitched their tents, and mists from the mighty Atlantic 30 looked on the happy valley, but ne'er from their station descended. There, in the midst of its farms, reposed the Acadian village. Strongly built were the houses, with frames of oak and of hemlock, such as the peasants of Normandy built in the reign of the Henrys. Thatched were the roofs, with dormer windows, and gables projecting 35 over the basement below protected and shaded the doorway. there in the tranquil evenings of summer, when brightly the sunset lighted the village street, and gilded the vanes on the chimneys, matrons and maidens sat in snow-white caps and in kirtles scarlet and blue and green, with distaffs spinning the golden 40 flax for the gossiping looms, whose noisy shuttles within doors mingled their sound with the whir of the wheels and the songs of the maidens. Solemnly down the street came the parish priest, and the children paused in their play to kiss the hand he extended to bless them. Reverend walked he among them, and up rose matrons and maidens, 45 hailing his slow approach with words of affectionate welcome. Then came the laborers home from the field, and serenely the sun sank down to his rest, and twilight prevailed. Anon from the belfry softly the Angelus sounded, and over the roofs of the village columns of pale blue smoke, like clouds of incense ascending, 50 rose from 100 hearths, the homes of peace and contentment. Thus dwelt together in love these simple Acadian farmers, dwelt in the love of God and of man. Alike were they free from fear, that reigns with the tyrant, and envy, the vice of republics. Neither locks had they to their doors, nor bars to their windows, 55, but their dwellings were open as day in the hearts of the owners. There the richest was poor, and the poorest lived in abundance. Somewhat apart from the village, and nearer the basin of Minas, Benedict Bell Fountain, the wealthiest farmer of Grand Prix, dwelt on his goodly acres, and with him, directing his household, 60 gentle Evangeline lived, his child, and the pride of the village. Stalworth and stately in form was the man of 70 winters. Hardy and hale was he, an oak that is covered with snowflakes. White as the snow were his locks, and his cheeks as brown as the oak leaves. Fair was she to behold, that maiden of 17 summers. 65 black were her eyes as the berry that grows on the thorn by the wayside, black, yet how softly they gleamed beneath the brown shade of her tresses. Sweet was her breath as the breath of kine that feed in the meadows. When in the harvest heat she bore to the reapers at noontide flagons of homebrewed ale, ah! Fair in sooth was the maiden. 70 fairer was she, when on Sunday morn, while the bell from its turret sprinkled with holy sounds the air, as the priest with his hyssop sprinkles the congregation, and scatters blessings upon them down the long street she passed, with her chaplet of beads and her missal, wearing her Norman cap and her kirtle of blue, and the earrings 75 brought in the olden time from France, and since, as an heirloom, handed down from mother to child, through long generations. But a celestial brightness, a more ethereal beauty, shone on her face and encircled her form, when, after confession, homeward serenely she walked with God's benediction upon her. 80 when she had passed, it seemed like the ceasing of exquisite music. Firmly builded with rafters of oak, the house of the farmer stood on the side of a hill commanding the sea, and a shady sycamore grew by the door, with a woodbine wreathing around it. Rudely carved was the porch, with seats beneath, and a footpath 85 led through an orchard wide, and disappeared in the meadow. Under the sycamore tree were hives overhung by a penthouse, such as the traveler sees in regions remote by the roadside, built o'er a box for the poor, or the blessed image of Mary. Farther down, on the slope of the hill, was the well with its moss-grown 90 bucket, fastened with iron, and near it a trough for the horses. Shielding the house from storms, on the north, were the barns and the farmyard. There stood the broad-wheeled wains and the antique plows and harrows. There were the folds for the sheep, and there in his feathered seraglio strutted the lordly turkey, and crowed the cock, with the selfsame 95 voice that in ages of old had startled the penitent Peter. Bursting with hay were the barns, themselves a village. In each one far o'er the gable projected a roof of thatch, and a staircase, under the sheltering eaves, led up to the odorous corn loft. There too the dovecot stood, with its meek and innocent inmates 100 murmuring ever of love, while above in the variant breezes numberless noisy weathercocks rattled and sang of mutation. Thus, at peace with God and the world, the farmer of Grand Prix lived on his sunny farm, and Evangeline governed his household. Many a youth, as he knelt in the church and opened his missal, 105 fixed his eyes upon her as the saint of his deepest devotion. Happy was he who might touch her hand or the hem of her garment. Many a suitor came to her door, by the darkness befriended, and, as he knocked and waited to hear the sound of her footsteps, knew not which beat the louder, his heart or the knocker of iron, 110 or, at the joyous feast of the patron saint of the village, bolder grew, and pressed her hand in the dance as he whispered hurried words of love that seemed a part of the music. But among all who came young Gabriel only was welcome, Gabriel Lajeunesse, the son of Basil the blacksmith, 115, who was a mighty man in the village, and honored of all men, for since the birth of time, throughout all ages and nations, has the craft of the smith been held in repute by the people. Basil was Benedict's friend. Their children from earliest childhood grew up together as brother and sister, and Father Felician, 120 priest and pedagogue both in the village, had taught them their letters out of the self-same book, with the hymns of the church and the plain song. But when the hymn was sung, and the daily lesson completed, swiftly they hurried away to the forge of Basil the blacksmith. There at the door they stood, with wondering eyes to behold him 125 take in his leathern lap the hoof of the horse as a plaything, nailing the shoe in its place, while near him the tire of the cartwheel lay like a fiery snake, coiled round in a circle of cinders. Oft on autumnal eves, when without in the gathering darkness bursting with light seemed the smithy, through every cranny and crevice, 130 warm by the forge within they watched the laboring bellows, and as its panting ceased, and the sparks expired in the ashes, merrily laughed, and said they were nuns going into the chapel. Oft on sledges in winter, as swift as the swoop of the eagle, down the hillside bounding, they glided away o'er the meadow. 135 oft in the barns they climbed to the populous nests on the rafters, seeking with eager eyes that wondrous stone, which the swallow brings from the shore of the sea to restore the sight of its fledglings. Lucky was he who found that stone in the nest of the swallow. Thus passed a few swift years, and they no longer were children. 140 he was a valiant youth, and his face, like the face of the morning, gladdened the earth with its light, and ripened thought into action. She was a woman now, with the heart and hopes of a woman. Sunshine of St. Eulalie was she called, for that was the sunshine which, as the farmers believed, would load their orchards with apples. 145 she too would bring to her husband's house delight and abundance, filling it full of love and ruddy faces of children. Section 2. Now had the season returned, when the nights grow colder and longer, and the retreating sun the sign of the scorpion enters. Birds of passage sailed through the leaden air, from the ice-bound, 150 desolate northern bays to the shores of tropical islands. Harvests were gathered in, and wild with the winds of September wrestled the trees of the forest, as Jacob of old with the angel. All the signs foretold a winter long and inclement. Bees, with prophetic instinct of want, had hoarded their honey 155 till the hives overflowed, and the Indian hunters asserted cold would the winter be, for thick was the fur of the foxes. Such was the advent of autumn. Then followed that beautiful season, called by the pious Acadian peasants the summer of All Saints. Filled was the air with a dreamy and magical light, and the landscape 160 lay as if new created in all the freshness of childhood. Peace seemed to reign upon earth, and the restless heart of the ocean was for a moment consoled. All sounds were in harmony blended. Voices of children at play, the crowing of cocks in the farmyards, whir of wings in the drowsy air, and the cooing of pigeons 165 all were subdued and low as the murmurs of love, and the great sun looked with the eye of love through the golden vapors around him, while arrayed in its robes of russet and scarlet and yellow, bright with the sheen of the dew, each glittering tree of the forest flashed like the plane tree the Persian adorned with mantles and jewels. 170. Now recommenced the reign of rest and affection and stillness. Day with its burden and heat had departed, and twilight descending brought back the evening star to the sky, and the herds to the homestead. Pawing the ground they came, and resting their necks on each other, and with their nostrils distended inhaling the freshness of evening. 175 foremost, bearing the bell, Evangeline's beautiful heifer, proud of her snow-white hide, and the ribbon that waved from her collar, quietly paced and slow, as if conscious of human affection. Then came the shepherd back with his bleating flocks from the seaside, where was their favorite pasture. Behind them followed the watchdog, 180 patient, full of importance, and grand in the pride of his instinct, walking from side to side with a lordly air, and superbly waving his bushy tail, and urging forward the stragglers, Regent of flocks was he when the shepherds slept, their protector, when from the forest at night, through the starry silence, the wolves howled. 185 late, with the rising moon, returned the wains from the marshes, laden with briny hay, that filled the air with its odor. Cheerily neighed the steeds, with dew on their manes and their fetlocks, while aloft on their shoulders the wooden and ponderous saddles, painted with brilliant dyes, and adorned with tassels of crimson, 190 nodded in bright array, like hollyhocks heavy with blossoms. Patiently stood the cows meanwhile, and yielded their udders unto the milkmaid's hand, whilst loud and in regular cadence into the sounding pails the foaming streamlets descended. Lowing of cattle and peals of laughter were heard in the farmyard, 195 echoed back by the barns. Anon they sank into stillness, heavily closed, with a jarring sound, the valves of the barn doors, rattled the wooden bars, and all for a season was silent. Indoors, warmed by the wide-mouthed fireplace, idly the farmer sat in his elbow chair, and watched how the flames and the smoke wreaths 200 struggled together like foes in a burning city. Behind him, nodding and mocking along the wall with gestures fantastic, darted his own huge shadow, and vanished away into darkness. Faces, clumsily carved in oak, on the back of his armchair, laughed in the flickering light, and the pewter plates on the dresser 205 caught and reflected the flame, as shields of armies the sunshine. Fragments of song the old man sang, and carols of Christmas, such as at home, in the olden time, his fathers before him sang in their Norman orchards and bright Burgundian vineyards. Close at her father's side was the gentle Evangeline seated, 210 spinning flax for the loom that stood in the corner behind her. Silent awhile were its treadles, at rest was its diligent shuttle, while the monotonous drone of the wheel, like the drone of a bagpipe, followed the old man's song, and united the fragments together. As in a church, when the chant of the choir at intervals ceases, 215 footfalls are heard in the aisles, or words of priest at the altar, so, in each pause of the song, with measured motion the clock clicked. Thus as they sat, there were footsteps heard, and suddenly lifted, sounded the wooden latch, and the door swung back on its hinges. Benedict knew by the hobnailed shoes it was Basil the blacksmith, 220, and by her beating heart Evangeline knew who was with him. "Welcome!" the farmer exclaimed, as their footsteps paused on the threshold. "Welcome, Basil, my friend! Come, take thy place on the settle close by the chimney side, which is always empty without thee. Take from the shelf overhead thy pipe and the box of tobacco. 225 Never so much thyself art thou as when, through the curling smoke of the pipe or the forge, thy friendly and jovial face gleams round and red as the harvest moon through the mist of the marshes." Then, with a smile of content, thus answered Basil the blacksmith, taking with easy air the accustomed seat by the fireside, 230, Benedict. Bellefontaine, thou hast ever thy jest and thy ballad. Ever in cheerfullest mood art thou, when others are filled with gloomy forebodings of ill, and see only ruin before them. Happy art thou, as if every day thou hadst picked up a horseshoe. Pausing a moment, to take the pipe that Evangeline brought him, 235, and with a coal from the embers had lighted, he slowly continued. 4 days now are past since the English ships at their anchors ride in the Gaspereau's mouth, with their cannon pointed against us. What their design may be is unknown, but all are commanded on the morrow to meet in the church, where His Majesty's mandate 240 will be proclaimed as law in the land. Alas! In the meantime many surmises of evil alarmed the hearts of the people. Then made answer the farmer. Perhaps some friendlier purpose brings these ships to our shores. Perhaps the harvests in England by untimely rains or untimelier heat have been blighted, 245, and from our bursting barns they would feed their cattle and children. Not so think the folk in the village, said warmly the blacksmith, shaking his head as in doubt. Then, heaving a sigh, he continued. Louisbourg is not forgotten, nor Beauséjour, nor Port Royal. Many already have fled to the forest, and lurk on its outskirts, 250 waiting with anxious hearts the dubious fate of tomorrow. Arms have been taken from us, and warlike weapons of all kinds. Nothing is left but the blacksmith's sledge and the scythe of the mower. Then with a pleasant smile made answer the jovial farmer. Safer are we unarmed, in the midst of our flocks and our cornfields, 255 safer within these peaceful dikes besieged by the ocean, than our fathers in forts, besieged by the enemy's cannon. Fear no evil, my friend, and tonight may no shadow of sorrow fall on this house and hearth, for this is the night of the contract. Built are the house and the barn. The merry lads of the village 260 strongly have built them and well, and breaking the glebe round about them, filled the barn with hay, and the house with food for a 12-month. René Leblanc will be here anon, with his papers and inkhorn. Shall we not then be glad, and rejoice in the joy of our children? As apart by the window she stood, with her hand in her lover's, 265 blushing Evangeline heard the words that her father had spoken, and, as they died on his lips, the worthy notary entered. Section 3. Bent like a laboring oar, that toils in the surf of the ocean, bent, but not broken, by age was the form of the notary public. Shocks of yellow hair, like the silken floss of the maize, hung 270 over his shoulders. His forehead was high, and glasses with horn bows sat astride on his nose, with a look of wisdom supernal. Father of 20 children was he, and more than 100 children's children rode on his knee, and heard his great watch tick. For long years in the times of the war had he languished a captive, 275 suffering much in an old French fort, as the friend of the English. Now, though warrior grown, without all guile or suspicion, ripe in wisdom was he, but patient, and simple, and childlike. He was beloved by all, and most of all by the children, for he told them tales of the loup-garou in the forest, 280, and of the goblin that came in the night to water the horses, and of the white Latiche, the ghost of a child who unchristened died, and was doomed to haunt unseen the chambers of children, and how on Christmas Eve the oxen talked in the stable, and how the fever was cured by a spider shut up in a nutshell. 285, and of the marvelous powers of four-leaved clover and horseshoes, with whatsoever else was writ in the lore of the village. Then up rose from his seat by the fireside Basil the blacksmith, knocked from his pipe the ashes, and slowly extending his right hand. "Father Leblanc," he exclaimed, "thou hast heard the talk in the village, 290, and perchance canst tell us some news of these ships and their errand." Then with modest demeanor made answer the notary public. "Gossip enough have I heard, in sooth, yet am never the wiser, and what their errand may be I know no better than others. Yet am I not of those who imagine some evil intention. 295 brings them here, for we are at peace, and why then molest us?" "God's name!" shouted the hasty and somewhat irascible blacksmith. "Must we in all things look for the how, and the why, and the wherefore? Daily injustice is done, and might is the right of the strongest." But without heeding his warmth, continued the notary public, 300. "Man is unjust, but God is just, and finally justice triumphs. And well I remember a story that often consoled me, when as a captive I lay in the old French fort at Port Royal." This was the old man's favorite tale, and he loved to repeat it when his neighbors complained that any injustice was done them. 305. Once in an ancient city, whose name I no longer remember, raised aloft on a column, a brazen statue of justice stood in the public square, upholding the scales in its left hand, and in its right a sword, as an emblem that justice presided over the laws of the land, and the hearts and homes of the people. 310 Even the birds had built their nests in the scales of the balance, having no fear of the sword that flashed in the sunshine above them. But in the course of time the laws of the land were corrupted. Might took the place of right, and the weak were oppressed, and the mighty ruled with an iron rod. Then it chanced in a nobleman's palace 315 that a necklace of pearls was lost, and ere long a suspicion fell on an orphan girl who lived as maid in the household. She, after form of trial condemned to die on the scaffold, patiently met her doom at the foot of the statue of justice. As to her father in heaven her innocent spirit ascended, 320 lo! O'er the city a tempest rose, and the bolts of the thunder smote the statue of bronze, and hurled in wrath from its left hand down on the pavement below the clattering scales of the balance, and in the hollow thereof was found the nest of a magpie, into whose clay-built walls the necklace of pearls was enwoven. 325 Silenced, but not convinced, when the story was ended, the blacksmith stood like a man who fain would speak, but findeth no language, all his thoughts were congealed into lines on his face, as the vapors freeze in fantastic shapes on the window panes in the winter. Then Evangeline lighted the brazen lamp on the table, 330 filled, till it overflowed, the pewter tankard with home-brewed nut-brown ale, that was famed for its strength in the village of Grand Prix, while from his pocket the notary drew his papers and inkhorn, wrote with a steady hand the date and the age of the parties, naming the dower of the bride in flocks of sheep and in cattle. 335 orderly all things proceeded, and duly and well were completed, and the great seal of the law was set like a sun on the margin. Then from his leathern pouch the farmer threw on the table 3 times the old man's fee in solid pieces of silver, and the notary rising, and blessing the bride and bridegroom, 340 lifted aloft the tankard of ale and drank to their welfare. Wiping the foam from his lip, he solemnly bowed and departed, while in silence the others sat and mused by the fireside, till Evangeline brought the draught board out of its corner. Soon was the game begun. In friendly contention the old men 345 laughed at each lucky hit, or unsuccessful maneuver, laughed when a man was crowned, or a breach was made in the king row. Meanwhile, apart, in the twilight gloom of a window's embrasure, sat the lovers and whispered together, beholding the moon rise over the pallid sea and the silvery mist of the meadows. 350. Silently, one by one, in the infinite meadows of heaven, blossomed the lovely stars, the forget-me-nots of the angels. Thus was the evening passed. Anon the bell from the belfry rang out the hour of 9, the village curfew, and straightway rose the guests and departed, and silence reigned in the household. 355 Many a farewell word and sweet good night on the doorstep lingered long in Evangeline's heart, and filled it with gladness. Carefully then were covered the embers that glowed on the hearthstone, and on the oaken stairs resounded the tread of the farmer. Soon with a soundless step the foot of Evangeline followed. 360 up the staircase moved a luminous space in the darkness, lighted less by the lamp than the shining face of the maiden. Silent she passed through the hall, and entered the door of her chamber. Simple that chamber was, with its curtains of white, and its clothes press ample and high, on whose spacious shelves were carefully folded 365 linen and woolen stuffs, by the hand of Evangeline woven. This was the precious dower she would bring to her husband in marriage, better than flocks and herds, being proofs of her skill as a housewife. Soon she extinguished her lamp, for the mellow and radiant moonlight streamed through the windows, and lighted the room, till the heart of the maiden 370 swelled and obeyed its power, like the tremulous tides of the ocean. Ah! She was fair, exceeding fair to behold, as she stood with naked snow-white feet on the gleaming floor of her chamber. Little she dreamed that below, among the trees of the orchard, waited her lover and watched for the gleam of her lamp and her shadow. 375 yet were her thoughts of him, and at times a feeling of sadness passed o'er her soul, as the sailing shade of clouds in the moonlight flitted across the floor and darkened the room for a moment. And, as she gazed from the window, she saw serenely the moon pass forth from the folds of a cloud, and one star follow her footsteps, 380 as out of Abraham's tent young Ishmael wandered with Hagar. Section 4. Pleasantly rose next morn the sun on the village of Grand Prix. Pleasantly gleamed in the soft, sweet air the basin of Minas, where the ships, with their wavering shadows, were riding at anchor. Life had been long astir in the village, and clamorous labor 385 knocked with its 100 hands at the golden gates of the morning. Now from the country around, from the farms and neighboring hamlets, came in their holiday dresses the blithe Acadian peasants. Many a glad good morrow and jocund laugh from the young folk made the bright air brighter, as up from the numerous meadows, 390 where no path could be seen but the track of wheels in the greensward, group after group appeared, and joined, or passed on the highway. Long ere noon, in the village all sounds of labor were silenced. Thronged were the streets with people, and noisy groups at the house doors sat in the cheerful sun, and rejoiced and gossiped together. 395 every house was an inn, where all were welcomed and feasted, for with this simple people, who lived like brothers together, all things were held in common, and what one had was another's. Yet under Benedict's roof hospitality seemed more abundant, for Evangeline stood among the guests of her father. 400 bright was her face with smiles, and words of welcome and gladness fell from her beautiful lips, and blessed the cup as she gave it. Under the open sky, in the odorous air of the orchard, stripped of its golden fruit, was spread the feast of betrothal. There in the shade of the porch were the priest and the notary seated. 405 there good Benedict sat, and sturdy Basil the blacksmith. Not far withdrawn from these, by the cider press and the beehives, Michael the fiddler was placed, with the gayest of hearts and of waistcoats. Shadow and light from the leaves alternately played on his snow-white hair, as it waved in the wind, and the jolly face of the fiddler 410 glowed like a living coal when the ashes are blown from the embers. Gaily the old man sang to the vibrant sound of his fiddle, Tu les bourgeois de Chartres, and Le Carillon de Dunkirk, and anon with his wooden shoes beat time to the music. Merrily, merrily whirled the wheels of the dizzying dances 415 under the orchard trees and down the path to the meadows, old folk and young together, and children mingled among them. Fairest of all maids was Evangeline, Benedict's daughter. Noblest of all the youths was Gabriel, son of the blacksmith. So passed the morning away. And lo! With a summons sonorous 420 sounded the bell from its tower, and over the meadows a drum beat. Thronged ere long was the church with men. Without, in the churchyard, waited the women. They stood by the graves, and hung on the headstones garlands of autumn leaves and evergreens fresh from the forest. Then came the guard from the ships, and marching proudly among them 425 entered the sacred portal. With loud and dissonant clangor echoed the sound of their brazen drums from ceiling and casement, echoed a moment only, and slowly the ponderous portal closed, and in silence the crowd awaited the will of the soldiers. Then uprose their commander, and spake from the steps of the altar, 430 holding aloft in his hands, with the seals, the royal commission. You are convened this day, he said, by his Majesty's orders. Clement and kind has he been, but how you have answered his kindness let your own hearts reply. To my natural make and my temper painful the task is I do, which to you I know must be grievous. 435 yet must I bow and obey, and deliver the will of our monarch, namely, that all your lands, and dwellings, and cattle of all kinds forfeited be to the crown, and that you yourselves from this province be transported to other lands. God grant you may dwell there ever as faithful subjects, a happy and peaceable people. 440 prisoners now I declare you, for such is His Majesty's pleasure, as, when the air is serene in the sultry solstice of summer, suddenly gathers a storm, and the deadly sling of the hailstones beats down the farmer's corn in the field, and shatters his windows, hiding the sun, and strewing the ground with thatch from the house roofs. 445 bellowing fly the herds, and seek to break their enclosures. So on the hearts of the people descended the words of the speaker. Silent a moment they stood in speechless wonder, and then rose louder and ever louder a wail of sorrow and anger, and by one impulse moved, they madly rushed to the doorway. 450 vain was the hope of escape, and cries and fierce imprecations rang through the house of prayer, and high o'er the heads of the others rose, with his arms uplifted, the figure of Basil the blacksmith, as, on a stormy sea, a spar is tossed by the billows. Flushed was his face and distorted with passion, and wildly he shouted, 455. Down with the tyrants of England! We never have sworn them allegiance! Death to these foreign soldiers, who seize on our homes and our harvests! More he fain would have said, but the merciless hand of a soldier smote him upon the mouth, and dragged him down to the pavement. In the midst of the strife and tumult of angry contention, 460 lo! The door of the chancel opened, and Father Felician entered, with serious mien, and ascended the steps of the altar. Raising his reverend hand, with a gesture he awed into silence all that clamorous throng, and thus he spake to his people, deep were his tones and solemn. In accents measured and mournful 465 spake he, as, after the tocsin's alarum, distinctly the clock strikes. What is this that ye do, my children? What madness has seized you? 40 years of my life have I labored among you, and taught you, not in word alone, but in deed, to love one another. Is this the fruit of my toils, of my vigils and prayers and privations? 470 have you so soon forgotten all lessons of love and forgiveness? This is the house of the Prince of Peace, And would you profane it thus with violent deeds and hearts overflowing with hatred? Lo! Where the crucified Christ from his cross is gazing upon you. See! In those sorrowful eyes what meekness and holy compassion! 475 Hark! How those lips still repeat the prayer, O Father, forgive them! Let us repeat that prayer in the hour when the wicked assail us. Let us repeat it now, and say, O Father, forgive them! Few were his words of rebuke, but deep in the hearts of his people sank they, and sobs of contrition succeeded the passionate outbreak. 480 while they repeated his prayer and said, O Father, forgive them! Then came the evening service. The tapers gleamed from the altar, fervent and deep was the voice of the priest, and the people responded, not with their lips alone, but their hearts, and the Ave Maria sang they, and fell on their knees, and their souls, with devotion translated, 485 rose on the ardor of prayer, like Elijah ascending to heaven. Meanwhile had spread in the village the tidings of ill, and on all sides wandered, wailing, from house to house the women and children. Long at her father's door Evangeline stood, with her right hand shielding her eyes from the level rays of the sun, that, descending, for 90, lighted the village street with mysterious splendor, and roofed each peasant's cottage with golden thatch, and emblazoned its windows. Long within had been spread the snow-white cloth on the table. There stood the wheaten loaf, and the honey fragrant with wild flowers. There stood the tankard of ale, and the cheese fresh brought from the dairy. 495 and at the head of the board the great armchair of the farmer. Thus did Evangeline wait at her father's door, as the sun set through the long shadows of trees o'er the broad ambrosial meadows. Ah! On her spirit within a deeper shadow had fallen, and from the fields of her soul a fragrance celestial ascended, 500 charity, meekness, love, and hope, and forgiveness, and patience. Then, all forgetful of self, she wandered into the village, cheering with looks and words the mournful hearts of the women, as o'er the darkening fields with lingering steps they departed, urged by their household cares, and the weary feet of their children. 5:05 down sank the great red sun, and in golden, glimmering vapors veiled the light of his face, like the prophet descending from Sinai. Sweetly over the village the bell of the Angelus sounded. Meanwhile, amid the gloom, by the church Evangeline lingered. All was silent within, and in vain at the door and the windows 5:10 stood she, and listened and looked, until, overcome by emotion, "Gabriel!" cried she aloud with tremulous voice. But no answer came from the graves of the dead, nor the gloomier grave of the living. Slowly at length she returned to the tenantless house of her father. Smouldered the fire on the hearth, on the board was the supper untasted. 515 empty and drear was each room, and haunted with phantoms of terror. Sadly echoed her step on the stair and the floor of her chamber. In the dead of the night she heard the disconsolate rain fall loud on the withered leaves of the sycamore tree by the window. Keenly the lightning flashed, and the voice of the echoing thunder 520 told her that God was in heaven and governed the world he created. Then she remembered the tale she had heard of the justice of heaven. Soothed was her troubled soul, and she peacefully slumbered till morning. Section 5. 4 times the sun had risen and set, and now on the 5th day cheerily called the cock to the sleeping maids of the farmhouse. 5:25 soon o'er the yellow fields, in silent and mournful procession, came from the neighboring hamlets and farms the Acadian women, driving in ponderous wains their household goods to the seashore, pausing and looking back to gaze once more on their dwellings, ere they were shut from sight by the winding road and the woodland. 530 close at their sides their children ran, and urged on the oxen, while in their little hands they clasped some fragments of playthings. Thus to the Gaspereau's mouth they hurried, and there on the sea beach piled in confusion lay the household goods of the peasants. All day long between the shore and the ships did the boats ply. 535 all day long the wains came laboring down from the village. Late in the afternoon, when the sun was near to his setting, echoed far o'er the fields came the roll of drums from the churchyard. Thither the women and children thronged. On a sudden the church doors opened, and forth came the guard, and marching in gloomy procession 540 followed the long imprisoned, but patient, Acadian farmers. Even as pilgrims, who journey afar from their homes and their country, sing as they go, and in singing forget they are weary and wayworn. So with songs on their lips the Akkadian peasants descended down from the church to the shore, amid their wives and their daughters. 5:45 Foremost the young men came, and raising together their voices, sang with tremulous lips a chant of the Catholic missions. Sacred Heart of the Savior! O inexhaustible fountain! Fill our hearts this day with strength and submission and patience. Then the old men, as they marched, and the women that stood by the wayside 550 joined in the sacred psalm, and the birds in the sunshine above them mingled their notes therewith, like voices of spirits departed. Halfway down to the shore Evangeline waited in silence, not overcome with grief, but strong in the hour of affliction. Calmly and sadly she waited, until the procession approached her. 555 and she beheld the face of Gabriel pale with emotion. Tears then filled her eyes, and eagerly running to meet him, clasped she his hands, and laid her head on his shoulder, and whispered, Gabriel! Be of good cheer! For if we love one another nothing, in truth, can harm us, whatever mischances may happen. 560 Smiling she spake these words, then suddenly paused, for her father saw she, slowly advancing. Alas! How changed was his aspect! Gone was the glow from his cheek, and the fire from his eye, and his footstep heavier seemed with the weight of the heavy heart in his bosom. But with a smile and a sigh, she clasped his neck and embraced him. 565 Speaking words of endearment where words of comfort availed not. Thus to the Gaspereau's mouth moved on that mournful procession. Their disorder prevailed, and the tumult and stir of embarking. Busily plied the freighted boats, and in the confusion wives were torn from their husbands, and mothers, too late, saw their children 570 left on the land, extending their arms, with wildest entreaties. So unto separate ships were Basil and Gabriel carried, while in despair on the shore Evangeline stood with her father. Half the task was not done when the sun went down, and the twilight deepened and darkened around, and in haste the refluent ocean 575 fled away from the shore, and left the line of the sand beach covered with waifs of the tide, with kelp and the slippery seaweed. Farther back in the midst of the household goods and the wagons, like to a gypsy camp, or a leaguer after a battle, all escaped cut off by the sea, and the sentinels near them, 580 lay encamped for the night the houseless Akkadian farmers. Back to its nethermost caves retreated the bellowing ocean, dragging adown the beach the rattling pebbles, and leaving inland and far up the shore the stranded boats of the sailors. Then, as the night descended, the herds returned from their pastures, 585 sweet was the moist still air with the odor of milk from their udders lowing they waited, and long, at the well-known bars of the farmyard, waited and looked in vain for the voice and the hand of the milkmaid. Silence reigned in the streets, from the church no angelus sounded, rose no smoke from the roofs, and gleamed no lights from the windows. 590. But on the shores meanwhile the evening fires had been kindled, built of the driftwood thrown on the sands from wrecks in the tempest. Round them shapes of gloom and sorrowful faces were gathered, voices of women were heard, and of men, and the crying of children. Onward from fire to fire, as from hearth to hearth in his parish, 595 wandered the faithful priest, consoling and blessing and cheering, like unto shipwrecked Paul on Meleda's desolate seashore. Thus he approached the place where Evangeline sat with her father, and in the flickering light beheld the face of the old man, haggard and hollow and wan, and without either thought or emotion, 600 eon as the face of a clock from which the hands have been taken. Vainly Evangeline strove with words and caresses to cheer him, vainly offered him food, yet he moved not, he looked not, he spake not, but with a vacant stare, ever gazed at the flickering firelight. Benedicite! Murmured the priest, in tones of compassion. 605 more he fain would have said, but his heart was full, and his accents faltered and paused on his lips, as the feet of a child on a threshold, hushed by the scene he beholds, and the awful presence of sorrow. Silently, therefore, he laid his hand on the head of the maiden, raising his tearful eyes to the silent stars that above them 610 moved on their way, unperturbed by the wrongs and sorrows of mortals. Then sat he down at her side, and they wept together in silence. Suddenly rose from the south a light, as in autumn the blood-red moon climbs the crystal walls of heaven, and o'er the horizon Titan-like stretches its 100 hands upon mountain and meadow, 615 seizing the rocks and the rivers, and piling huge shadows together. Broader and ever broader it gleamed on the roofs of the village, gleamed on the sky and the sea, and the ships that lay in the roadstead. Columns of shining smoke uprose, and flashes of flame were thrust through their folds and withdrawn, like the quivering hands of a martyr. 620 then, as the wind seized the gleeds and the burning thatch, and uplifting, whirled them aloft through the air, at once from 100 housetops started the sheeted smoke with flashes of flame intermingled. These things beheld in dismay the crowd on the shore and on shipboard. Speechless at first they stood, then cried aloud in their anguish, 625. We shall behold no more our homes in the village of Grand Prix. Loud on a sudden the cocks began to crow in the farmyards, thinking the day had dawned, and anon the lowing of cattle came on the evening breeze, by the barking of dogs interrupted. Then rose a sound of dread, such as startles the sleeping encampments 630 far in the western prairies of forests that skirt the Nebraska, when the wild horses affrighted sweep by with the speed of the whirlwind, or the loud bellowing herds of buffaloes rush to the river. Such was the sound that arose on the night, as the herds and the horses broke through their folds and fences, and madly rushed o'er the meadows. 635. Overwhelmed with the sight, yet speechless, the priest and the maiden gazed on the scene of terror that reddened and widened before them, and as they turned at length to speak to their silent companion, lo! From his seat he had fallen, and stretched abroad on the seashore motionless lay his form, from which the soul had departed. 640 Slowly the priest uplifted the lifeless head, and the maiden knelt at her father's side, and wailed aloud in her terror. Then in a swoon she sank and lay with her head on his bosom. Through the long night she lay in deep, oblivious slumber, and when she woke from the trance, she beheld a multitude near her. 645 faces of friends she beheld, that were mournfully gazing upon her, pallid, with tearful eyes, and looks of saddest compassion. Still the blaze of the burning village illumined the landscape, reddened the sky overhead, and gleamed on the faces around her, and like the day of doom it seemed to her wavering senses. 650 Then a familiar voice she heard, as it said to the people, Let us bury him here by the sea. When a happier season brings us again to our homes from the unknown land of our exile, then shall his sacred dust be piously laid in the churchyard. Such were the words of the priest. And there in haste by the seaside, 655 having the glare of the burning village for funeral torches, but without bell or book, they buried the farmer of Grand Prix. And as the voice of the priest repeated the service of sorrow, lo! With a mournful sound like the voice of a vast congregation, solemnly answered the sea, and mingled its roar with the dirges. 660 was the returning tide, that far from the waste of the ocean, with the first dawn of the day, came heaving and hurrying landward. Then recommenced once more the stir and noise of embarking, and with the ebb of the tide the ships sailed out of the harbor, leaving behind them the dead on the shore, and the village in ruins. 665. Part the Second. Section 1. Many a weary year had passed since the burning of Grand Prix, when on the falling tide the freighted vessels departed, bearing a nation, with all its household gods, into exile, exile without an end, and without an example in story. Far asunder, on separate coasts, the Acadians landed. 670 scattered were they, like flakes of snow, when the wind from the northeast strikes aslant through the fogs that darken the banks of Newfoundland. Friendless, homeless, hopeless, they wandered from city to city, from the cold lakes of the north to sultry southern savannas, from the bleak shores of the sea to the lands where the Father of Waters 675 seizes the hills in his hands, and drags them down to the ocean, deep in their sands to bury the scattered bones of the mammoth. Friends they sought and homes, and many, despairing, heartbroken, asked of the earth but a grave, and no longer a friend nor a fireside. Written their history stands on tablets of stone in the churchyards. 680 long among them was seen a maiden who waited and wandered, lowly and meek in spirit, and patiently suffering all things. Fair was she and young, but, alas! Before her extended, dreary and vast and silent, the desert of life, with its pathway marked by the graves of those who had sorrowed and suffered before her, 685 passions long extinguished, and hopes long dead and abandoned, as the emigrant's way o'er the western desert is marked by campfires long consumed, and bones that bleach in the sunshine. Something there was in her life incomplete, imperfect, unfinished, as if a morning of June, with all its music and sunshine, 690 suddenly paused in the sky, and fading, slowly descended into the east again, from whence it late had arisen. Sometimes she lingered in towns, till, urged by the fever within her, urged by a restless longing, the hunger and thirst of the spirit, she would commence again her endless search and endeavor. 695 sometimes in churchyards strayed, and gazed on the crosses and tombstones, sat by some nameless grave, and thought that perhaps in its bosom he was already at rest, and she longed to slumber beside him. Sometimes a rumor, a hearsay, an inarticulate whisper, came with its airy hand to point and beckon her forward. 700 sometimes she spake with those who had seen her beloved and known him, but it was long ago, in some far-off place or forgotten. "Gabriel Lajeunesse," they said. "Oh, yes! We have seen him. He was with Basil the blacksmith, and both have gone to the prairies. Coureurs de bois are they, and famous hunters and trappers." 705. "Gabriel Lajeunesse," said others. "Oh, yes! We have seen him. He is a voyageur in the lowlands of Louisiana." Then would they say, "Dear child, why dream and wait for him longer? Are there not other youths as fair as Gabriel? Others who have hearts as tender and true, and spirits as loyal? 710 Here is Baptiste Leblanc, the notary's son, who has loved thee many a tedious year. Come, give him thy hand and be happy. Thou art too fair to be left to braid St. Catherine's tresses." Then would Evangeline answer, serenely but sadly, "I cannot. Whither my heart has gone, there follows my hand, and not elsewhere." 715 For when the heart goes before, like a lamp, and illumines the pathway, many things are made clear, that else lie hidden in darkness. Thereupon the priest, her friend and father confessor, said, with a smile, "O daughter! Thy God thus speaketh within thee. Talk not of wasted affection, affection never was wasted. 720 If it enrich not the heart of another, its waters, returning back to their springs, like the rain, shall fill them full of refreshment. That which the fountain sends forth returns again to the fountain. Patience, accomplish thy labor, accomplish thy work of affection. Sorrow and silence are strong, and patient endurance is godlike. 725 Therefore accomplish thy labor of love, till the heart is made godlike, purified, strengthened, perfected, and rendered more worthy of heaven." Cheered by the good man's words, Evangeline labored and waited. Still in her heart she heard the funeral dirge of the ocean, but with its sound there was mingled a voice that whispered, "Despair not!" 730 Thus did that poor soul wander in want and cheerless discomfort, bleeding, barefooted, over the shards and thorns of existence. Let me essay, O Muse, to follow the wanderer's footsteps, not through each devious path, each changeful year of existence, but as a traveler follows a streamlet's course through the valley, 735 far from its margin at times, and seeing the gleam of its water here and there, in some open space, and at intervals only, then drawing nearer its banks through sylvan glooms that conceal it, though he behold it not. He can hear its continuous murmur, happy, at length, if he find a spot where it reaches an outlet. 740. Section 2. It was the month of May. Far down the beautiful river, past the Ohio shore and past the mouth of the Wabash, into the golden stream of the broad and swift Mississippi, floated a cumbrous boat, that was rowed by Acadian boatmen. It was a band of exiles, a raft, as it were, from the shipwrecked 745 nation, scattered along the coast, now floating together, bound by the bonds of a common belief and a common misfortune, men and women and children, who, guided by hope or by hearsay, sought for their kith and their kin among the few-acred farmers on the Acadian coast and the prairies of fair Opelousas. 750 With them Evangeline went, and her guide, the Father Felician. Onward o'er sunken sands through a wilderness sombre with forests, Day after day they glided adown the turbulent river, night after night, by their blazing fires, encamped on its borders. Now through rushing chutes, among green islands, where plume-like 755 cotton trees nodded their shadowy crests, they swept with the current, then emerged into broad lagoons, where silvery sandbars lay in the stream, and along the wimpling waves of their margin, shining with snow-white plumes, large flocks of pelicans waded. Level the landscape grew, and along the shores of the river, 760 shaded by china trees, in the midst of luxuriant gardens, stood the houses of planters, with negro cabins and dovecots. They were approaching the region where reigns perpetual summer, where through the golden coast, and groves of orange and citron, sweeps with majestic curve the river away to the eastward. 765 they, too, swerved from their course, and entering the bayou of Plaquemine, soon were lost in a maze of sluggish and devious waters, which, like a network of steel, extended in every direction. Over their heads the towering and tenebrous boughs of the cypress met in a dusky arch, and trailing mosses in mid-air 770 waved like banners that hang on the walls of ancient cathedrals. Deathlike the silence seemed, and unbroken, save by the herons home to their roosts in the cedar trees returning at sunset, or by the owl, as he greeted the moon with demoniac laughter. Lovely the moonlight was as it glanced and gleamed on the water. 775 gleamed on the columns of cypress and cedar sustaining the arches, down through whose broken vaults it fell as through chinks in a ruin. Dreamlike and indistinct and strange were all things around them, and o'er their spirits there came a feeling of wonder and sadness, strange forebodings of ill, unseen and that cannot be compassed. 780 as, at the tramp of a horse's hoof on the turf of the prairies, far in advance are closed the leaves of the shrinking mimosa, so, at the hoof-beats of fate, with sad forebodings of evil, shrinks and closes the heart, ere the stroke of doom has attained it. But Evangeline's heart was sustained by a vision, that faintly 785 floated before her eyes, and beckoned her on through the moonlight. It was the thought of her brain that assumed the shape of a phantom. Through those shadowy aisles had Gabriel wandered before her, and every stroke of the oar now brought him nearer and nearer. Then, in his place, at the prow of the boat, rose one of the oarsmen, 790 and, as a signal sound, if others like them peradventure sailed on those gloomy and midnight streams, blew a blast on his bugle. Wild through the dark colonnades and corridors leafy the blast rang, breaking the seal of silence and giving tongues to the forest. Soundless above them the banners of moss just stirred to the music. 795 multitudinous echoes awoke and died in the distance, over the watery floor, and beneath the reverberant branches. But not a voice replied, no answer came from the darkness, and when the echoes had ceased, like a sense of pain was the silence. Then Evangeline slept, but the boatmen rowed through the midnight, 800 silent at times, then singing familiar Canadian boat songs, such as they sang of old on their own Acadian rivers. While through the night were heard the mysterious sounds of the desert, far off, indistinct, as of wave or wind in the forest, mixed with the whoop of the crane and the roar of the grim alligator. 805. Thus ere another noon they emerged from the shades, and before them lay, in the golden sun, the lakes of the Atchafalaya. Water lilies in myriads rocked on the slight undulations made by the passing oars, and resplendent in beauty, the lotus lifted her golden crown above the heads of the boatmen. 8:10 faint was the air with the odorous breath of magnolia blossoms, and with the heat of noon, and numberless sylvan islands, fragrant and thickly embowered with blossoming hedges of roses, near to whose shores they glided along, invited to slumber. Soon by the fairest of these their weary oars were suspended. 815 under the boughs of Wachita willows, that grew by the margin, safely their boat was moored, and scattered about on the greensward, tired with their midnight toil, the weary travelers slumbered. Over them vast and high extended the cope of a cedar. Swinging from its great arms, the trumpet flower and the grapevine 820 hung their ladder of ropes aloft like the ladder of Jacob, on whose pendulous stairs the angels ascending, descending, were the swift humming birds, that flitted from blossom to blossom. Such was the vision Evangeline saw as she slumbered beneath it. Filled was her heart with love, and the dawn of an opening heaven 825 lighted her soul in sleep with the glory of regions celestial. Nearer, ever nearer, among the numberless islands, darted a light, swift boat, that sped away o'er the water, urged on its course by the sinewy arms of hunters and trappers. Northward its prow was turned, to the land of the bison and beaver. 8:30 at the helm sat a youth, with countenance thoughtful and careworn. Dark and neglected locks overshadowed his brow, and a sadness somewhat beyond his years on his face was legibly written. Gabriel was it, who, weary with waiting, unhappy and restless, sought in the western wilds oblivion of self and of sorrow. 835 swiftly they glided along, close under the lee of the island, but by the opposite bank, and behind a screen of palmettos, so that they saw not the boat, where it lay concealed in the willows. All undisturbed by the dash of their oars, and unseen, were the sleepers. Angel of God was there none to awaken the slumbering maiden. 840 swiftly they glided away, like the shade of a cloud on the prairie. After the sound of their oars on the tholes had died in the distance, as from a magic trance the sleepers awoke, and the maiden said with a sigh to the friendly priest, "O Father Felician! Something says in my heart that near me Gabriel wanders. 845 is it a foolish dream, an idle and vague superstition? Or has an angel passed, and revealed the truth to my spirit?" Then, with a blush, she added, "Alas for my credulous fancy! Unto ears like thine such words as these have no meaning." But made answer the reverend man, and he smiled as he answered, 850. "Daughter, thy words are not idle, nor are they to me without meaning. Feeling is deep and still, and the word that floats on the surface is as the tossing buoy that betrays where the anchor is hidden. Therefore trust to thy heart, and to what the world calls illusions. Gabriel truly is near thee, for not far away to the southward, 855 on the banks of the Teche, are the towns of St. Maur and St. Martin. There the long-wandering bride shall be given again to her bridegroom, there the long-absent pastor regain his flock and his sheepfold. Beautiful is the land, with its prairies and forests of fruit trees, under the feet a garden of flowers, and the bluest of heavens 860 bending above, and resting its dome on the walls of the forest. They who dwell there have named it the Eden of Louisiana." With these words of cheer they arose and continued their journey. Softly the evening came. The sun from the western horizon like a magician extended his golden wand over the landscape. 865 twinkling vapors arose, and sky and water and forest seemed all on fire at the touch, and melted and mingled together. Hanging between two skies, a cloud with edges of silver, floated the boat, with its dripping oars, on the motionless water. Filled was Evangeline's heart with inexpressible sweetness. 870 touched by the magic spell, the sacred fountains of feeling glowed with the light of love, as the skies and waters around her. Then from a neighboring thicket the mocking-bird, wildest of singers, swinging aloft on a willow spray that hung o'er the water, shook from his little throat such floods of delirious music 875 that the whole air, and the woods and the waves seemed silent to listen. Plaintive at first were the tones, and sad, then soaring to madness seemed they to follow or guide the revel of frenzied bacchantes. Single notes were then heard, in sorrowful, low lamentation, till, having gathered them all, he flung them abroad in derision, 880 as when, after a storm, a gust of wind through the treetops shakes down the rattling rain in a crystal shower on the branches. With such a prelude as this, and hearts that throbbed with emotion, slowly they entered the Teche, where it flows through the green Opelousas, and through the amber air, above the crest of the woodland. 885 saw the column of smoke that arose from a neighboring dwelling, sounds of a horn they heard, and the distant lowing of cattle. Section 3. Near to the bank of the river, o'ershadowed by oaks from whose branches garlands of Spanish moss and of mystic mistletoe flaunted, such as the Druids cut down with golden hatchets at Yuletide, 890 stood, secluded and still, the house of the herdsman. A garden girded it round about with a belt of luxuriant blossoms, filling the air with fragrance. The house itself was of timbers hewn from the cypress tree, and carefully fitted together. Large and low was the roof, and on slender columns supported, 895 rose-wreathed, vine-encircled, a broad and spacious veranda, haunt of the humming-bird and the bee, extended around it. At each end of the house, amid the flowers of the garden, stationed the dovecots were, as love's perpetual symbol, scenes of endless wooing, and endless contentions of rivals. 900 silence reigned o'er the place. The line of shadow and sunshine ran near the tops of the trees, but the house itself was in shadow, and from its chimney top, ascending and slowly expanding into the evening air, a thin blue column of smoke rose. In the rear of the house, from the garden gate, ran a pathway 905 through the great groves of oak to the skirts of the limitless prairie, into whose sea of flowers the sun was slowly descending. Full in his track of light, like ships with shadowy canvas hanging loose from their spars in a motionless calm in the tropics, stood a cluster of trees, with tangled cordage of grapevines. 910. Just where the woodlands met the flowery surf of the prairie, mounted upon his horse, with Spanish saddle and stirrups, sat a herdsman, arrayed in gaiters and doublet of deerskin. Broad and brown was the face that from under the Spanish sombrero gazed on the peaceful scene, with the lordly look of its master. 915 round about him were numberless herds of kine that were grazing quietly in the meadows, and breathing the vapory freshness that uprose from the river, and spread itself over the landscape. Slowly lifting the horn that hung at his side, and expanding fully his broad, deep chest, he blew a blast that resounded 920 wildly and sweet and far, through the still damp air of the evening. Suddenly out of the grass the long white horns of the cattle rose like flakes of foam on the adverse currents of ocean. Silent a moment they gazed, then bellowing rushed o'er the prairie, and the whole mass became a cloud, a shade in the distance. 925 then, as the herdsman turned to the house, through the gate of the garden saw he the forms of the priest and the maiden advancing to meet him. Suddenly down from his horse he sprang in amazement, and forward pushed with extended arms and exclamations of wonder. When they beheld his face, they recognized Basil the blacksmith. 930 hearty his welcome was, as he led his guests to the garden. There in an arbor of roses with endless question and answer gave they vent to their hearts, and renewed their friendly embraces, laughing and weeping by turns, or sitting silent and thoughtful. Thoughtful, for Gabriel came not, and now dark doubts and misgivings 935 stole o'er the maiden's heart, and Basil, somewhat embarrassed, broke the silence and said, "If you came by the Atchafalaya, how have you nowhere encountered my Gabriel's boat on the bayous?" Over Evangeline's face at the words of Basil a shade passed. Tears came into her eyes, and she said, with a tremulous accent, 940. "Gone? Is Gabriel gone?" And concealing her face on his shoulder, all her o'erburdened heart gave way, and she wept and lamented. Then the good Basil said, and his voice grew blithe as he said it, "Be of good cheer, my child, it is only today he departed. Foolish boy! He has left me alone with my herds and my horses." 945 moody and restless grown, and tried and troubled, his spirit could no longer endure the calm of this quiet existence. Thinking ever of thee, uncertain and sorrowful ever, ever silent, or speaking only of thee and his troubles, he at length had become so tedious to men and to maidens, 950 tedious even to me, that at length I bethought me, and sent him unto the town of Adaes to trade for mules with the Spaniards. Thence he will follow the Indian trails to the Ozark Mountains, hunting for furs in the forests, on rivers trapping the beaver. Therefore be of good cheer, we will follow the fugitive lover. 955 he is not far on his way, and the fates and the streams are against him. Up and away tomorrow, and through the red dew of the morning, we will follow him fast, and bring him back to his prison. Then glad voices were heard, and up from the banks of the river, borne aloft on his comrade's arms, came Michael the fiddler. 960 long under Basil's roof had he lived, like a god on Olympus, having no other care than dispensing music to mortals. Far renowned was he for his silver locks and his fiddle. "Long live Michael!" they cried. "Our brave Acadian minstrel!" as they bore him aloft in triumphal procession, and straightway 965 Father Felician advanced with Evangeline, greeting the old man kindly and oft, and recalling the past, while Basil, enraptured, hailed with hilarious joy his old companions and gossips, laughing loud and long, and embracing mothers and daughters. Much they marveled to see the wealth of the ci-devant blacksmith, 970 all his domains and his herds, and his patriarchal demeanor. Much they marveled to hear his tales of the soil and the climate, and of the prairies, whose numberless herds were his who would take them. Each one thought in his heart that he, too, would go and do likewise. Thus they ascended the steps, and crossing the breezy veranda, 975 entered the hall of the house, where already the supper of Basil waited his late return, and they rested and feasted together. Over the joyous feast the sudden darkness descended. All was silent without, and illuming the landscape with silver, fair rose the dewy moon and the myriad stars. But within doors, 980 brighter than these, shone the faces of friends in the glimmering lamplight. Then from his station aloft, at the head of the table, the herdsman poured forth his heart and his wine together in endless profusion. Lighting his pipe, that was filled with sweet Natchitoches tobacco, thus he spake to his guests, who listened, and smiled as they listened. 985. Welcome once more, my friends, who long have been friendless and homeless. Welcome once more to a home that is better perchance than the old one. Here no hungry winter congeals our blood like the rivers. Here no stony ground provokes the wrath of the farmer. Smoothly the plowshare runs through the soil, as a keel through the water. 990 all the year round the orange groves are in blossom, and grass grows more in a single night than a whole Canadian summer. Here, too, numberless herds run wild and unclaimed in the prairies. Here, too, lands may be had for the asking, and forests of timber with a few blows of the axe are hewn and framed into houses. 995 after your houses are built, and your fields are yellow with harvests, no King George of England shall drive you away from your homesteads, burning your dwellings and barns, and stealing your farms and your cattle. Speaking these words, he blew a wrathful cloud from his nostrils, while his huge, brown hand came thundering down on the table, 1,000 so that the guests all started, and Father Felician, astounded, suddenly paused, with a pinch of snuff halfway to his nostrils. But the brave Basil resumed, and his words were milder and gayer. Only beware of the fever, my friends, beware of the fever! For it is not like that of our cold Acadian climate, 1005 cured by wearing a spider hung round one's neck in a nutshell. Then there were voices heard at the door, and footsteps approaching sounded upon the stairs and the floor of the breezy veranda. It was the neighboring Creoles and small Acadian planters, who had been summoned all to the house of Basil the herdsman. 1010 merry the meeting was of ancient comrades and neighbors, friend clasped friend in his arms, and they who before were as strangers, meeting in exile, became straightway as friends to each other, drawn by the gentle bond of a common country together. But in the neighboring hall a strain of music, proceeding 1015 from the accordant strings of Michael's melodious fiddle, broke up all further speech. Away, like children delighted, all things forgotten beside, they gave themselves to the maddening whirl of the dizzy dance as it swept and swayed to the music, dreamlike, with beaming eyes and the rush of fluttering garments. 1020. Meanwhile, apart, at the head of the hall, the priest and the herdsman sat, conversing together of past and present and future, while Evangeline stood like one entranced, for within her olden memories rose, and loud in the midst of the music heard she the sound of the sea, and an irrepressible sadness 1025 came o'er her heart, and unseen she stole forth into the garden. Beautiful was the night. Behind the black wall of the forest, tipping its summit with silver, arose the moon. On the river fell here and there through the branches a tremulous gleam of the moonlight, like the sweet thoughts of love on a darkened and devious spirit. 1030 nearer and round about her, the manifold flowers of the garden poured out their souls and odors, that were their prayers and confessions unto the night, as it went its way, like a silent Carthusian. Fuller of fragrance than they, and as heavy with shadows and night dews, hung the heart of the maiden. The calm and the magical moonlight 1035 seemed to inundate her soul with indefinable longings, as, through the garden gate, and beneath the shade of the oak trees, passed she along the path to the edge of the measureless prairie. Silent it lay, with a silvery haze upon it, and fireflies gleaming and floating away in mingled and infinite numbers. 1040 over her head the stars, the thoughts of God in the heavens, shone on the eyes of man, who had ceased to marvel and worship, save when a blazing comet was seen on the walls of that temple, as if a hand had appeared and written upon them, "A parson." And the soul of the maiden, between the stars and the fireflies, 1045 wandered alone, and she cried, "O Gabriel! O my beloved! Art thou so near unto me, and yet I cannot behold thee? Art thou so near unto me, and yet thy voice does not reach me? Ah! How often thy feet have trod this path to the prairie! Ah! How often thine eyes have looked on the woodlands around me! 1050 ah! How often beneath this oak, returning from labor, thou hast lain down to rest, and to dream of me in thy slumbers! When shall these eyes behold, these arms be folded about thee?" Loud and sudden and near the note of a whippoorwill sounded like a flute in the woods, and anon, through the neighboring thickets, 1055 farther and farther away it floated and dropped into silence. "Patience!" whispered the oaks from oracular caverns of darkness, and from the moonlit meadow, a sigh responded, "Tomorrow!" Bright rose the sun next day, and all the flowers of the garden bathed his shining feet with their tears, and anointed his tresses 1060 with the delicious balm that they bore in their vases of crystal. "Farewell," said the priest, as he stood at the shadowy threshold. "See that you bring us the prodigal son from his fasting and famine, and too, the foolish virgin, who slept when the bridegroom was coming." "Farewell," answered the maiden, and smiling, with Basil descended 1065 down to the river's brink, where the boatmen already were waiting. Thus beginning their journey with morning, and sunshine, and gladness, swiftly they followed the flight of him who was speeding before them, blown by the blast of fate like a dead leaf over the desert. Not that day, nor the next, nor yet the day that succeeded, 1070 found they trace of his course, in lake or forest or river, nor, after many days, had they found him, but vague and uncertain rumors alone were their guides through a wild and desolate country, till, at the little inn of the Spanish town of Adaes, weary and worn, they alighted, and learned from the garrulous landlord 1075 that on the day before, with horses and guides and companions, Gabriel left the village, and took the road of the prairies. Section 4. Far in the west there lies a desert land, where the mountains lift, through perpetual snows, their lofty and luminous summits. Down from their jagged, deep ravines, where the gorge, like a gateway, 1080 opens a passage rude to the wheels of the emigrant's wagon, westward the Oregon flows and the Walway and Oahe. Eastward, with devious course, among the Wind River Mountains, through the Sweetwater Valley precipitate leaps the Nebraska, and to the south, from Fontaine Quibout and the Spanish Sierras, 1085 fretted with sands and rocks, and swept by the wind of the desert, numberless torrents, with ceaseless sound, descend to the ocean, like the great chords of a harp, in loud and solemn vibrations. Spreading between these streams are the wondrous, beautiful prairies, billowy bays of grass ever rolling in shadow and sunshine, 1090 bright with luxuriant clusters of roses and purple amorphous. Over them wandered the buffalo herds, and the elk, and the roebuck, over them wandered the wolves, and herds of riderless horses, fires that blast and blight, and winds that are weary with travel, over them wandered the scattered tribes of Ishmael's children, 1095 staining the desert with blood, and above their terrible war trails circles and sails aloft, on pinions majestic, the vulture. Like the implacable soul of a chieftain slaughtered in battle, by invisible stairs ascending and scaling the heavens. Here and there rise smokes from the camps of these savage marauders, 1100 here and there rise groves from the margins of swift-running rivers, and the grim, taciturn bear, the anchorite monk of the desert, climbs down their dark ravines to dig for roots by the brookside, and over all is the sky, the clear and crystalline heaven, like the protecting hand of God inverted above them. 1105. Into this wonderful land, at the base of the Ozark Mountains, Gabriel Farr had entered, with hunters and trappers behind him. Day after day, with their Indian guides, the maiden and Basil followed his flying steps, and thought each day to o'ertake him. Sometimes they saw, or thought they saw, the smoke of his campfire 1110 rise in the morning air from the distant plain. But at nightfall, when they had reached the place, they found only embers and ashes. And though their hearts were sad at times and their bodies were weary, hope still guided them on, as the magic Fata Morgana showed them her lakes of light, that retreated and vanished before them. 1115. Once, as they sat by their evening fire, there silently entered into the little camp an Indian woman, whose features wore deep traces of sorrow, and patience as great as her sorrow. She was a Shawnee woman returning home to her people, from the far-off hunting grounds of the cruel Comanches, 1120, where her Canadian husband, a coureur de bois, had been murdered. Touched were their hearts at her story, and warmest and friendliest welcome gave they, the words of cheer, and she sat and feasted among them on the buffalo meat and the venison cooked on the embers. But when their meal was done, and Basil and all his companions, 1125, worn with the long day's march and the chase of the deer and the bison, stretched themselves on the ground, and supped where the quivering firelight flashed on their swarthy cheeks, and their forms wrapped up in their blankets, then at the door of Evangeline's tent she sat and repeated slowly, with soft, low voice, and the charm of her Indian accent, 1130, all the tale of her love, with its pleasures, and pains, and reverses. Much Evangeline wept at the tale, and to know that another hapless heart like her own had loved and had been disappointed. Moved to the depths of her soul by pity and woman's compassion, yet in her sorrow pleased that one who had suffered was near her, 1135, she in turn related her love and all its disasters. Mute with wonder the Shawnee sat, and when she had ended still was mute, but at length, as if a mysterious horror passed through her brain, she spake, and repeated the tale of the Moas, the bridegroom of snow, who won and wedded a maiden. 1140, but, when the morning came, arose and passed from the wigwam, fading and melting away and dissolving into the sunshine, till she beheld him no more, though she followed far into the forest. Then, in those sweet, low tones, that seemed like a weird incantation, told she the tale of the fair Lilino, who was wooed by a phantom, 1145, that, through the pines o'er her father's lodge, in the hush of the twilight, breathed like the evening wind, and whispered love to the maiden, till she followed his green and waving plume through the forest, and never more returned, nor was seen again by her people. Silent with wonder and strange surprise, Evangeline listened 1150 to the soft flow of her magical words, till the region around her seemed like enchanted ground, and her swarthy guest the enchantress. Slowly over the tops of the Ozark Mountains the moon rose, lighting the little tent, and with a mysterious splendor touching the somber leaves, and embracing and filling the woodland. 1155, with a delicious sound the brook rushed by, and the branches swayed and sighed overhead in scarcely audible whispers. Filled with the thoughts of love was Evangeline's heart, but a secret, subtle sense crept in of pain and indefinite terror, as the cold, poisonous snake creeps into the nest of the swallow. 1160, it was no earthly fear. A breath from the region of spirits seemed to float in the air of night, and she felt for a moment that, like the Indian maid, she, too, was pursuing a phantom. With this thought she slept, and the fear and the phantom had vanished. Early upon the morrow the march was resumed, and the Shawnee 1165 said, as they journeyed along, "On the western slope of these mountains dwells in his little village the black-robed chief of the mission. Much he teaches the people, and tells them of Mary and Jesus. Loud laugh their hearts with joy, and weep with pain, as they hear him." Then, with a sudden and secret emotion, Evangeline answered, 1170, "Let us go to the mission, for their good tidings await us." Thither they turned their steeds, and behind a spur of the mountains, just as the sun went down, they heard a murmur of voices, and in a meadow green and broad, by the bank of a river, saw the tents of the Christians, the tents of the Jesuit mission. 1175, under a towering oak, that stood in the midst of the village, knelt the black-robed chief with his children. A crucifix fastened high on the trunk of the tree, and overshadowed by grapevines, looked with its agonized face on the multitude kneeling beneath it. This was their rural chapel. Aloft, through the intricate arches 1180 of its aerial roof, arose the chant of their vespers, mingling its notes with the soft susurrus and sighs of the branches. Silent, with heads uncovered, the travelers, nearer approaching, knelt on the sward floor, and joined in the evening devotions. But when the service was done, and the benediction had fallen 1185 forth from the hands of the priest, like seed from the hands of the sower, slowly the reverend man advanced to the strangers, and bade them welcome, and when they replied, he smiled with benignant expression, hearing the homelike sounds of his mother tongue in the forest, and with words of kindness conducted them into his wigwam. 1190 Thereupon mats and skins they reposed, and on cakes of the mazier feasted, and slaked their thirst from the water-gourd of the teacher. Soon was their story told, and the priest with solemnity answered, Not 6 suns have risen and set since Gabriel, seated on this mat by my side, where now the maiden reposes, 1195 told me the same sad tale, then arose and continued his journey. Soft was the voice of the priest, and he spake with an accent of kindness, but on Evangeline's heart fell his words as in winter the snowflakes fall into some lone nest from which the birds have departed. Far to the north he has gone, continued the priest, but in autumn, 1200 when the chase is done, will return again to the mission. Then Evangeline said, and her voice was meek and submissive, Let me remain with thee, for my soul is sad and afflicted. So seemed it wise and well unto all, and betimes on the morrow, mounting his Mexican steed, with his Indian guides and companions, 1205 homeward Basil returned, and Evangeline stayed at the mission. Slowly, slowly the days succeeded each other, days and weeks and months, and the fields of maize that were springing green from the ground when a stranger she came, now waving about her, lifted their slender shafts, with leaves interlacing, and forming 12 tin cloisters for mendicant crows and granaries pillaged by squirrels. Then in the golden weather the maize was husked, and the maidens blushed at each blood-red ear, for that betokened a lover, but at the crooked laughed, and called it a thief in the cornfield. Even the blood-red ear to Evangeline brought not her lover. 1215. Patience, the priest would say. Have faith, and thy prayer will be answered. Look at this vigorous plant that lifts its head from the meadow, see how its leaves are turned to the north, as true as the magnet. This is the compass flower, that the finger of God has planted here in the houseless wild, to direct the traveler's journey 1220 over the sea-like, pathless, limitless waste of the desert. Such in the soul of man is faith. The blossoms of passion, gay and luxuriant flowers, are brighter and fuller of fragrance, but they beguile us, and lead us astray, and their odor is deadly. Only this humble plant can guide us here, and hereafter 1225 crown us with asphodel flowers, that are wet with the dews of Nepenthe. So came the autumn, and passed, and the winter, yet Gabriel came not. Blossomed the opening spring, and the notes of the robin and bluebird sounded sweet upon wold and in wood, yet Gabriel came not. But on the breath of the summer winds a rumor was wafted 1230 sweeter than the song of bird, or hue or odor of blossom. Far to the north and east, it is said, in the Michigan forests, Gabriel had his lodge by the banks of the Saginaw River. And with returning guides that sought the lakes of St. Lawrence, saying a sad farewell, Evangeline went from the mission. 1235 when over weary ways, by long and perilous marches, she had attained at length the depths of the Michigan forests, found she the hunter's lodge deserted and fallen to ruin. Thus did the long sad years glide on, and in seasons and places divers and distant far was seen the wandering maiden. 1240 now in the tents of grace of the meek Moravian missions, now in the noisy camps and the battlefields of the army, now in secluded hamlets, in towns and populous cities. Like a phantom she came, and passed away unremembered. Fair was she and young, when in hope began the long journey. 1245 faded was she and old, when in disappointment it ended. Each succeeding year stole something away from her beauty, leaving behind it, broader and deeper, the gloom and the shadow. Then there appeared and spread faint streaks of gray o'er her forehead, dawn of another life, that broke o'er her earthly horizon, 1250 as in the eastern sky the first faint streaks of the morning. Section 5. In that delightful land which is washed by the Delaware's waters, guarding in sylvan shades the name of Penn the Apostle, stands on the banks of its beautiful stream the city he founded. There all the air is balm, and the peach is the emblem of beauty. 1255 and the streets still re-echo the names of the trees of the forest, as if they fain would appease the dryads whose haunts they molested. There from the troubled sea had Evangeline landed, an exile, finding among the children of Penn a home and a country. Their old René Leblanc had died, and when he departed, 1260 saw at his side only one of all his 100 descendants. Something at least there was in the friendly streets of the city, something that spake to her heart, and made her no longer a stranger, and her ear was pleased with the thee and thou of the Quakers, for it recalled the past, the old Acadian country, 1265, where all men were equal, and all were brothers and sisters. So, when the fruitless search, the disappointed endeavor, ended, to recommence no more upon earth, uncomplainingly, thither, as leaves to the light, were turned her thoughts and her footsteps. As from a mountain's top the rainy mists of the morning 1270 roll away, and afar we behold the landscape below us, sun-illumined, with shining rivers and cities and hamlets, so fell the mist from her mind, and she saw the world far below her, dark no longer, but all illumined with love, and the pathway which she had climbed so far, lying smooth and fair in the distance. 1275 Gabriel was not forgotten. Within her heart was his image, clothed in the beauty of love and youth, as last she beheld him, only more beautiful made by his death-like silence and absence. Into her thoughts of him time entered not, for it was not. Over him years had no power, he was not changed, but transfigured. 1280 he had become to her heart as one who is dead, and not absent. Patience and abnegation of self, and devotion to others, this was the lesson a life of trial and sorrow had taught her. So was her love diffused, but, like to some odorous spices, suffered no waste nor loss, though filling the air with aroma. 1285 Other hope had she none, nor wish in life, but to follow, meekly with reverent steps, the sacred feet of her Saviour. Thus many years she lived as a sister of mercy, frequenting lonely and wretched roofs in the crowded lanes of the city, where distress and want concealed themselves from the sunlight. 1290 where disease and sorrow in garrets languished neglected. Night after night when the world was asleep, as the watchman repeated loud, through the gusty streets, that all was well in the city, high at some lonely window he saw the light of her taper. Day after day, in the grey of the dawn, as slow through the suburbs 1295 plodded the German farmer, with flowers and fruits for the market, met he that meek, pale face, returning home from its watchings. Then it came to pass that a pestilence fell on the city, presaged by wondrous signs, and mostly by flocks of wild pigeons, darkening the sun in their flight, with naught in their craws but an acorn. 1300 and, as the tides of the sea arise in the month of September, flooding some silver stream, till it spreads to a lake in the meadow, so death flooded life, and o'erflowing its natural margin, spread to a brackish lake the silver stream of existence. Wealth had no power to bribe, nor beauty to charm, the oppressor, 1305, but all perished alike beneath the scourge of his anger. Only, alas! the poor, who had neither friends nor attendants, crept away to die in the almshouse, home of the homeless. Then in the suburbs it stood, in the midst of meadows and woodlands. Now the city surrounds it, but still, with its gateway and wicket 1310 meek, in the midst of splendor, its humble walls seem to echo softly the words of the Lord. The poor ye always have with you. Thither, by night and by day, came the Sister of Mercy. The dying looked up into her face, and thought, indeed, to behold their gleams of celestial light encircle her forehead with splendor, 1315, such as the artist paints o'er the brows of saints and apostles, or such as hangs by night o'er a city seen at a distance. Unto their eyes it seemed the lamps of the city celestial, into whose shining gates ere long their spirits would enter. Thus, on a Sabbath morn, through the streets, deserted and silent, 1320, wending her quiet way, she entered the door of the almshouse. Sweet on the summer air was the odor of flowers in the garden, and she paused on her way to gather the fairest among them, that the dying once more might rejoice in their fragrance and beauty. Then, as she mounted the stairs to the corridors, cooled by the east wind, 1325, distant and soft on her ear fell the chimes from the belfry of Christ Church, while, intermingled with these, across the meadows were wafted sounds of psalms, that were sung by the Swedes in their church at Wicklow. Soft as descending wings fell the calm of the hour on her spirit. Something within her said, "At length thy trials are ended." 1330, and with light in her looks, she entered the chambers of Cygnus. Noiselessly moved about the assiduous, careful attendants, moistening the feverish lip, and the aching brow, and in silence closing the sightless eyes of the dead, and concealing their faces, where on their pallets they lay, like drifts of snow by the roadside. 1335, many a languid head, upraised as Evangeline entered, turned on its pillow of pain to gaze while she passed, for her presence fell on their hearts like a ray of the sun on the walls of a prison. And, as she looked around, she saw how Death the Consoler, laying his hand upon many a heart, had healed it forever. 1340 Many familiar forms had disappeared in the night time, vacant their places were, or filled already by strangers. Suddenly, as if arrested by fear or a feeling of wonder, still she stood, with her colorless lips apart, while a shudder ran through her frame, and, forgotten, the flowerets dropped from her fingers, 1345, and from her eyes and cheeks the light and bloom of the morning. Then there escaped from her lips a cry of such terrible anguish, that the dying heard it, and started up from their pillows. On the pallet before her was stretched the form of an old man. Long, and thin, and grey were the locks that shaded his temples, 1350, but, as he lay in the morning light, his face for a moment seemed to assume once more the forms of its earlier manhood, so are wont to be changed the faces of those who are dying. Hot and red on his lips still burned the flush of the fever, as if life, like the Hebrew, with blood had besprinkled its portals, 1355, that the angel of death might see the sign, and pass over. Motionless, senseless, dying, he lay, and his spirit exhausted seemed to be sinking down through infinite depths in the darkness of slumber and death, forever sinking and sinking. Then through those realms of shade, in multiplied reverberations, 1360 heard he that cry of pain, and through the hush that succeeded whispered a gentle voice, in accents tender and saint-like, "Gabriel! O my beloved!" and died away into silence. Then he beheld, in a dream, once more the home of his childhood, green Acadian meadows, with sylvan rivers among them, 1365, village, and mountain, and woodlands, and walking under their shadow, as in the days of her youth, Evangeline rose in his vision. Tears came into his eyes, and as slowly he lifted his eyelids, vanished the vision away, but Evangeline knelt by his bedside. Vainly he strove to whisper her name, for the accents unuttered 1370 died on his lips, and their motion revealed what his tongue would have spoken. Vainly he strove to rise, and Evangeline, kneeling beside him, kissed his dying lips, and laid his head on her bosom. Sweet was the light of his eyes, but it suddenly sank into darkness, as when a lamp is blown out by a gust of wind at a casement. 1375. All was ended now, the hope, and the fear, and the sorrow, all the aching of heart, the restless, unsatisfied longing, all the dull, deep pain, and constant anguish of patience. And, as she pressed once more the lifeless head to her bosom, meekly she bowed her own, and murmured, "Father, I thank thee." 1380. Still stands the forest primeval, but far away from its shadow, side by side, in their nameless graves, the lovers are sleeping. Under the humble walls of the little Catholic churchyard, in the heart of the city, they lie, unknown and unnoticed. Daily the tides of life go ebbing and flowing beside them, 1385 thousands of throbbing hearts, where theirs are at rest and forever, thousands of aching brains, where theirs no longer are busy, thousands of toiling hands, where theirs have ceased from their labors, thousands of weary feet, where theirs have completed their journey. Still stands the forest primeval, but under the shade of its branches 1390 dwells another race, with other customs and language. Only along the shore of the mournful and misty Atlantic linger a few Acadian peasants, whose fathers from exile wandered back to their native land to die in its bosom. In the fisherman's cot the wheel and the loom are still busy. 1395 maidens still wear their Norman caps and their kirtles of homespun, and by the evening fire repeat Evangeline's story, while from its rocky caverns the deep-voiced, neighboring ocean speaks, and in accents disconsolate answers the wail of the forest. Pictures. Perry Pictures helpful in the study of Evangeline. Christ Church, Boston, 1357. The Sheepfold, 3049. The Blacksmith, 887. Evangeline, 23. The Wave, 3197. Spring, 484. Pasturage in the Forest, 506. Sheep Spring, 757. Milking Time, 601. Angelus, 509. Haymaker's Rest, 605. Landscape, 490. Priscilla spinning, 3298. Shoeing the horse, 908. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, 15. Priscilla, 1338. Autumn, 615. September, 1071. Deer by Moonlight, 1005. Winter Scene, 27b. We supply the above at 1 cent each, if 20 or more are ordered. They may be assorted, as desired. Notes. Part 1. 1. A primeval forest is one which has not been disturbed by the axe. 3. Druids were Celtic priests. Their religious ceremonies were carried on in oak groves, the trees being regarded as sacred. 10. Grand Prix, Grand PR, equals A, means large meadow. 20. Basin of Minas, an arm of the Bay of Fundy. 25. The tides in the Bay of Fundy rise to the height of 60 feet. What is the ordinary rise of the tide? 29. Blomidon is a promontory about 400 feet high at the entrance of the Bay of Minas. 33. The Henrys were rulers of France in the 16th and 17th centuries. 34. Normandy, a district in northern France bordering on the English Channel. 39. Kirtle, a petticoat. 49. The Angelus was a bell which called people to prayer. What do you know of the painting called The Angelus? 57. Real misery was wholly unknown, and benevolence anticipated the demands of poverty. Every misfortune was relieved, as it were, before it could be felt, without ostentation on the one hand and without meanness on the other. It was, in short, a society of brethren. Abbé Raynal. 72. Hyssop, a plant. A branch of it could be used like a sponge. It was a symbol of purification from sin. 74. Chaplet of beads, a string of beads used in praying. Missal, a prayer book. 96. See Luke 22, 60, 61. 111. A patron saint was a saint who was supposed to exercise a special care over the people of a town or district. 115. La jeunesse, la jeunesse. 144. There was a saying among the people that, if the sun shines on St. Eulalie's day, there will be a good crop of apples. It was February 12th. 2. 149. The scorpion is one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. The sun enters this sign in late October. 153. For the reference to Jacob, see Gen 32, 24-30. 159. The summer of All Saints corresponds to our Indian summer. All Saints' Day is Nov. 1st. 170. Plane tree, a species of sycamore. Xerxes, a Persian, admired one of them so much he put a mantle upon it, and adorned it with jewels. 209. Burgundy is a section of eastern France famous for its fine wines. 238. The Gaspereau is a river that flows into the basin of Minas, east of Grand Prix. 242. Glebe soil. 249. Louisbourg, Beauséjour, B equals OOS equals EZH equals O equals OR, and Port Royal were towns which had been taken from the French by the British. 259. The contract was considered almost as binding as a marriage. Remember this. 260-2. As soon as a young man arrived at the proper age, the community built him a house, broke the land about it, and supplied him with all the necessaries of life for 12 months. Then he received the partner whom he had chosen, and who brought him her portion in flocks. Abbé Raynal. 3. 280. Loup-garou, L equals O equals OGR equals O equals O, means man-wolf. There was a tradition that a man had the power to change himself into a wolf to devour children. 282. Latiche, L equals A T equals ESH. 293. In sooth, in truth. 307. A figure with scales in the left hand and a sword in the right is sometimes used to represent justice. 354. The curfew was a bell tolled in the evening as a signal to put out the fires and go to bed. 381. See Gen 21:14. 4. 413. The names of 2 French songs. 442. The summer solstice is on the 21st of June. The sun is then farthest north, being over the Tropic of Cancer. It seems to stand still for a short time. 466. The author contrasts the clamor of the throng and the quiet words of Father Felician by referring to rapid strokes of the alarm and the quiet, measured strokes of the hour. 476. See Luke 23:34. 484. Ave Maria Ave equals A Mar equals E A prayer to the Virgin Mary. 486. See 2 Kings 2:11. 507. See Exodus 24:29-35. The 572-3. Parents were separated from children and husbands from wives, some of whom have not to this day met again, and we were so crowded in the transport vessels that we had not even room to lay down, and consequently were prevented from carrying with us proper necessaries, especially for the support and comfort of the aged and weak, many of whom quickly ended their lives. Petition of the Acadians to the King. 579. Leaguer, an army camp. 589. See lines 49-50. 597. See Acts 27-28. 604. Benedicite bless you. 631. Nebraska, now known as the Platte River. 667. Bell or Book, Funeral Bell, or Book of Funeral Service. Part 2. I. 674. Savannas, grassy plains. 678-9. We have already seen, in this province of Pennsylvania, 250 of our people, which is more than half the number that were landed here, perished through misery and various diseases. Petition of the Acadians to the King. 705. Coureurs de Boisquet equals O Rurdi equals A BWA guides. 707. Voyageur voyageur equals U R river boatman. 713. To braid St. Catherine's tresses means to remain unmarried. 733. Muse, here the goddess of song. There were 9 muses in all. 2. 741. The beautiful river, the Ohio. 749. Acadian coast, districts near the mouth of the Mississippi River where many Acadians had settled. Opelousas, a district in Louisiana. 764. Golden Coast, banks of the Mississippi above New Orleans. 766. Plaquemine PLAKM equals EN. 782. Mimosa, a plant which closes its leaves when agitated. 807. Atchafalaya AF equals AL equals I a river in Louisiana. 815. Wachita WOSH equals Ta, a river in Louisiana. 821. See Genesis 28:10-15. 856. Techa T equals ASH, a bayou. St. More SANM equals OR. 879. Bacchantes, followers of Bacchus, god of wine. 3. 889. Mistletoe, a parasite plant which grows on many trees. 890. Yuletide, Christmas time. 952. Adays AD equals AES, town in Texas. 956. The Fates, 3 goddesses who were supposed to control human destinies. 961. Olympus, a mountain of Greece supposed by the ancient Greeks to be the home of the gods. 970. Seidavant, S equals E, divan former. 984. Natchitoches, NACKEDOSH, a district of Louisiana. 1033. Carthusian, a monk of an order where only occasional speech is permitted. 1044. Upharson, divided. See Daniel v. 5-29. 1054. This was considered a bad omen. 1063. See Luke 15:11-32. 1064. See Matthew 25:1-13. 4. 1082. Oregon, the Columbia River. Waway, a branch of the Snake River. Auihi, river in same region. 1083. Wind River Mountains, a chain of the Rocky Mountains, in Wyoming. 1084. Sweetwater Valley, in Wyoming. Nebraska, the Platte River. 1085. Fontainebleau, FONT equals A, NK equals E, B equals O, a creek in Colorado. Spanish Sierras, mountain range in New Mexico. 1091. Amorphous, a shrub having clusters of blue flowers. 1095. Ishmael's children. The Arabs are considered descendants of Ishmael. Because of their warlike spirit, the American Indians have been thought to be descendants of Ishmael. See Genesis 21, 14-21. 1114. Fata Morgana, et fata morgiana mirage. 1139. Mois, M, equals OW, equals ES. 1167. Black Robe Chief, Jesuit priest at the head of the mission, so called because of his black robe. 1182. Susurrus, whisperings. 1219. Humble plant, a plant that grows on the prairies whose leaves point north and south, thus serving as a guide. 1241. Moravian missions. The Moravians are a Christian sect noted for their missionary zeal. v. 1256. A number of streets in Philadelphia have the name of trees, as walnut, chestnut, etc. 1257. Dryads, goddesses of the woods. 1288. Sister of Mercy, a member of an order in the Roman Catholic Church. The members devote their lives to works of charity. 1355. See Exodus 12, 22-23. Argument. Evangeline is usually studied in the 7th school year, a time when a somewhat intensive study of a piece of literature may be undertaken with profit. This poem offers a most delightful introduction into the wider realms of literature, an introduction fraught with much consequence, since the manner of it is likely to have a considerable bearing on the pupil's future in this subject. It is certainly important that the most be made of the opportunity. We believe that the common lack of interest and effort in school work is often due to an absence of definite and visible ends, and of proper directions for the reaching of those ends. Pupils do not object to work, and hard work, with something tangible. What they do object to is groping in the dark for something that may turn up, which is too frequently the case in their study of a piece of literature. Such a course may be commendable later, but at this period, suggestion and direction are necessary. These are furnished by our suggestive questions, which indicate lines of study and research. In the ordinary reading class, the work is largely done by a few of the brighter pupils. It is quite difficult to secure a careful preparation by the whole class. It is also difficult to ascertain how well the pupils are prepared. The suggestive questions will be found very helpful here. Care has been exercised in the division of the subject matter that each lesson may, in a sense, be complete in itself. The lessons are supposed to occupy 25 or 30 minutes. This, with the nature of the subject matter and the number of unfamiliar words, determining the length of the lessons. The poem is to be studied twice. First, a general survey to get the story and the characters clearly in mind. Second, a careful study of the text that the beauty and richness, the artistic and ethical values of the poem may be realized. It is obvious that no scheme, however carefully wrought out, can in any sense be a substitute for earnestness, enthusiasm, and sympathy, and careful preparation is an absolute essential of all successful teaching. With these, it is believed, excellent results may be secured by use of this plan. W. F. Conover. B.St. School, San Diego, California. Part 1. A General Survey. Lesson I. The Author and the Poem. Lesson 2. Acadia and the Acadians. Lesson 3. Discuss the structure of the poem and how it should be read. Read. Lessons 4-13. Read a section each day to get the outlines of the story. Notice carefully the topics given on the following pages, and be able to tell with what lines each topic begins and ends. In the other sections, make lists of topics, filling out the outlines. Be careful to choose the principal topics and not subordinate ones. Evangeline, Part 1, Section I. Acadia. 1. Grand Prix. 2. Benedict Bellefontaine. 3. Evangeline. 4. The Home. 5. Gabriel, Basil, Father Felician. 6. Childhood of Evangeline and Gabriel. 7. Manhood and Womanhood. Sector 2. The Home. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sector 3. The Interview. 1. The notary. 2. The argument and story. 3. The betrothal. 4. The game. 5. Departure of guests. 6. Evangeline. Sector 4. The summons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Section V. The embarking. 1. Gathering of goods. 2. Evangeline's message. 3. Separated. 4. The camp. 5. Fire. 6. Death of Benedict. 7. Exiled. Evangeline, Part 2. Section I. The search begun. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sector 2. On the Mississippi. 1. The boatman. 2. The journey. 3. Forebodings of ill. 4. The sleep. 5. The bugle. 6. The passing. 7. Evangeline's dream. 8. Journey continued. 9. Arrival. Sector 3. Reunion. Search again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sector 4. Search continued. 1. The Great West. 2. Old campfires. 3. The Shawnee, Confidences. 4. March resumed. 5. The mission. 6. Patience. 7. Rumors. On to Michigan. 8. Years of search. Section V. Search ended. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Part 2. Study of the text. 1. Lessons 1 to 27. 2. Composition subjects. The questions on the following pages are intended to be suggestive of lines of study. Others of like or different import will occur to the teacher. Don't be confined to the written questions. Many others will be needed to bring out the artistic and spiritual values of the poem, and to keep the thread of the story in mind. Pupils are expected to know the meaning of words and the particular one the author employs. The understanding of a passage often depends on the meaning of a single word. See Part 3. Suggestive questions. Evangeline, Part 1, Section I. Introduction. Grand Prix. Lesson I, lines 1 to 57. The author gives us a hint of the nature of his narrative. In what lines does he directly refer to it? This is a story of what? What 3 qualities had this thing? What 2 pictures does the author contrast? Lines 6 to 15. Why murmuring pines? What 2 parts of one picture? Lines 1 to 5. Why compare to the row? In what ways did their lives resemble a river? Why October leaves? Remember, this is a story of what? Its 3 qualities are what? What is the first picture in Section I? What quality of the people is referred to in line 24? The Acadians were engaged in what industry? Would their lives be more peaceful in this than in other lines of labor? Why use repose? Line 32. Who was intimately associated with all the life of the village? Explain lines 52 to 56 and 57. Evangeline. Lesson 2, lines 58 to 81. What is the topic of this lesson? Who is also introduced to us? Describe. What does the comparison with an oak suggest? What was Evangeline's age? Describe her appearance. What qualities does this description show of her? What was Benedict's most marked characteristic? Evangeline's? Home and childhood of Evangeline and Gabriel. Lesson 3, lines 82 to 147. Why does the author describe the home so carefully? What do we learn of Evangeline? Lines 104 to 114. What 2 characters are here introduced? Tell about their childhood days. Note the early attraction of these 2 for each other. What about the wondrous stone? Have stones such powers? Evangeline's name, line 144, indicates what? Sector 2. Autumn. Evening out of doors. Indoors. Lesson 4, lines 148 to 198. What is the season? What is the sign of the scorpion? What season follows? Signs point to what? Why should the author refer to signs of a hard winter? What idea does the author reiterate? Lines 160 to 175. Note: the author brings up one picture after another to impress us in this way. Why? Does he picture the home clearly? Describe. What things of old-time life does he mention? Give topic, lines 199 to 217. Where were the Norman orchards? What does the loom suggest? Visitors. The news. Argument. Lesson V, lines 247 to 267. What relations existed between Basil and Benedict? How do you know? Note carefully how the talk shows character. How did each view the news? Does the author make many simple statements of facts, or does he use much imagery? Is this so common in prose? Which was the better way of viewing the news? Why refer to Louisbourg, Beauséjour, and Port Royal? Had Basil good reasons for his suspicions? Why were the Acadians safer than their fathers? Why did Benedict wish to have no fear? What was the purpose of the call? What preparations had been made for the marriage? Sector 3. The Notary and His Story. Lesson 6, lines 268 to 329. A new character in the story. What others have we met thus far? In what regard was the notary held? Describe him. Why did the children like him? What was the lore of the village? Contrast the blacksmith's and the notary's manner. Explain line 299. Does the notary's story prove his point, that justice finally triumphs? Why? What effect upon Basil has the story? Explain lines 328 to 329. Signing the contract. The last goodnight. Lesson 7, lines 330 to 381. What do you learn from line 333? What characteristic does Benedict show? Line 339. Learn 351 to 352. Were these marriage papers that were signed? What? What 3 facts of old-time life? Lines 353 to 368. What are compared? Lines 368 to 371. Why should Evangeline feel sad at this time? Was it natural? How could the star follow her footsteps? Look up reference line 381. Sector 4. The Betrothal Feast. The Mandate. Lesson 8, lines 382 to 459. Was the betrothal feast an important event in Grand Prix? So much thought of now. Explain 385 to 386. For what purpose were the people gathering? How did Acadian life differ from that of today? Why was hospitality greater under Benedict's roof? Who were some of the principal persons at the feast? Who is now introduced? Was there a peculiar sadness in the occurrences of the day? Why? We have 3 pictures strongly contrasted in this, the preceding and the succeeding lessons. Try to get a clear idea of each of these 3 scenes. Contrast the feast and the reception of the mandate. Why refer to the solstice? What was the immediate effect of the news? Then what? Was it a time when character would show? Explain. Who shows clearly his temperament? Father Felician's rebuke. Lesson 9, lines 460 to 486. To me, this selection is one of the finest in the poem. It is a fine tribute to character. We have in this and the preceding lesson 2 pictures in marked contrast. Recall the effects the mandate must have had on the pioneers, how we of the class would feel if we now received such an order. Think of the homes made by long years of patient toil, the familiar and much-loved scenes, all that made life dear, must be left behind and life begun anew amid strange scenes and among strange people. What utter despair must have possessed them! What scene of wild passion Father Felician met when he opened the church door! Could force have quieted this mob? Could they have been made quiet? Then Father Felician enters, raises his hand, and stillness reigns. What causes this great change? What wisdom does the priest show? Does he say much? To what does he turn their thoughts? Why? Who is the Prince of Peace? What great character in history had a like power over a multitude? Was it a great thing that the people could say from their hearts, "Oh, Father, forgive them"? Who said it before this? The evening service is held and quiet after the storm. How were their souls translated? What is the reference to Elijah? Evangeline's service. Shadows. Lesson X, lines 487 to 523. What change here introduced? Why should it come in here? Any reason except a continuation of the story? A well-written play or story has a careful mixture of pathos and humor. Explain and apply. Note lines 499 to 501. What was the source of Evangeline's great strength of character? Who was the prophet? Has the reference to the Angelus any suggestive sadness? Why graves of the living? Why did the thunder speak to her? What did it suggest? Section V. Gathering on the beach. Lesson 11, lines 524 to 590. How long were they in the church? What was the attitude of the Acadians? What happens similarly in nature? What characteristic of woman is shown in lines 553 to 567? Compare Evangeline, Gabriel, and Benedict at this point. Did Evangeline meet her father and Gabriel in different ways? Why? Did she show wisdom in so doing? What turning point now comes? Imagine a different circumstance. How would it affect the remainder of the story? Picture the village. Why refer to the waifs of the tide? The camp. Burning village. Lesson 12, lines 591 to 635. Picture the camp. Why refer to Paul? What was the condition of Benedict? What disposition did he show in this trouble? Do you suppose Basil was affected in the same way? How do an oak and a willow take a storm? Which is the better way? Who was the oak and who the willow? What does Father Felician do? Does he show discernment? Explain 612 to 615. How many and what distinct pictures do you find in the lesson? Write lines 613 to 620 in your own words and compare. Death. Separation. Lesson 13, lines 636 to 665. What was the effect of the fire on Benedict? The effect of her father's death on Evangeline? What does, without bell or book, mean? What of nature seemed in harmony with the occasion? What two great sorrows came to Evangeline so closely? Review closing incidents and Part 1. Evangeline, Part 2. Section I. Landing. Search begun. Lesson 14, lines 666 to 705. How long time has elapsed since the embarking? What were the Acadians' household gods? Why was the exile without an end? Why should the author use this comparison about their scattering? Explain fully about the seizing of the hills. What was the attitude of many Acadians? Of Evangeline? What is the desert of life? Why so called? What makes life a desert? Explain fully lines 683 to 687. What was there singular about Evangeline's life? What effect had this on her life? What was the inarticulate whisper that came to her? Pressing on. Lesson 15, lines 706 to 740. What is a voyageur? What was Evangeline advised to do by her friends? Should she have followed their advice? Give reason. What was it to braid St. Catherine's tresses? What do you think of Evangeline's reply? Learn lines 720 to 727. Explain. What was the funeral dirge which she heard? What was the voice that replied? What is the muse? Who appeals to it? How is it to be followed? Sector 2. On the river. Forebodings. Lesson 16, lines 741 to 789. Has the author followed the wanderer's footsteps in Section I, Part 2? Locate scene pictured in lines 741 to 745. How were these people bound together? How strongly? Picture the scene in lines 757 to 765 clearly. Why Golden Coast? What is a maze? What did the moss look like? What is demoniac laughter? What purpose does the author serve in bringing in this incident? Describe scene in lines 763 to 767. How did the exiles feel this night? What about the mimosa? What are the hoofbeats of fate? What effect have the hoofbeats? Was Evangeline in the same mood as the others? Read to line 863, and then consider carefully the scene and events to line 790. Study with care. Night on the river. The passing. Lesson 17, lines 790 to 841. Explain lines 790 to 794 and lines 798 to 799. Why do you suppose the bugle was not heard? What if it was? Why did they row at midnight? Why does the author bring in something weird again as in line 805? Note change from night with its weird uncertainty to day with its quiet peace and beauty. Why refer to Jacob's ladder? How can you account for conditions given in lines 824 to 5? Note that here a calm precedes the storm. Who were in the boat speeding north? What was the last we heard of Gabriel? What changes had occurred in his appearance? How did he take his lot and disappointment? How different from Evangeline? Does the account of the passing seem reasonable? Are such occurrences common in general life? Evangeline's dream. Arrival. Lesson 18, lines 842 to 887. Does it seem reasonable that Evangeline felt Gabriel was near? Explain and learn lines 852 to 4. Explain 858. Why Eden of Louisiana? Has Father Felician given up to despair on any occasion? What kept him from despairing? Had he despaired, how would it have affected Evangeline and the story? Note scene in lines 864 to 868. Does the author here give a picture of nature in harmony with a condition of mind? Where? Find like treatment in this section. The mocking bird here reminds one of what bird in another scene? Does each seem an appropriate part of the picture? What was the prelude? Why were their hearts moved with emotion? Sector 3. Meeting Basil. Disappointment. Lesson 19, lines 888 to 958. Find subject and predicate of first sentence. Describe house and surroundings. Would flowers grow thus in Acadia? What was love's symbol? Why sea of flowers? Explain 904 to 910. Why surf? Contrast Basil's home in Grand Prix and the one here. Explain lines 933. Was Basil's way of breaking the news about Gabriel a good one? Why should she be deeply disappointed? Did Gabriel bear his disappointment as did Evangeline? What was the result of Evangeline's longing? Of Gabriel's? Why a fugitive lover? Why fates and streams against him? What did Basil mean? Line 958. Reunion and feast. Lesson XX, lines 959-1020. Note here change of scene. Is it from pathos to humor or from humor to pathos? What do you gather from lines 959 to 960 and 964 to 965? From 961 to 2? Why should they marvel? Compare conditions of life in Acadia and in Louisiana. What familiar fact does Basil show? Line 982. Why refer to King George? Note the very attractive picture Basil draws, almost a picture of Eden. Was there an if about it, a final word that quite changed the shading of the picture? Is it usually thus? Were the Acadians naturally light-hearted? Despair. Hope. On again. Lesson 21, lines 1021 to 1077. What effect had this scene on Evangeline? Why should she hear the sounds of the sea? Why desire to leave the merriment? Explain 1028 to 1038. Stars are here spoken of as God's thoughts. What else has the author called them? Explain 1041 to 1044. Was the evening in harmony with Evangeline's mood? Why was it the oaks whispered patience, and not the beeches or other trees? Explain 1059 to 1061. Who were going in quest of Gabriel? Explain references of prodigal son and foolish virgin, and apply. How was Gabriel blown by fate like the dead leaf? How long before they found traces of Gabriel? What traces? What news finally? Where were they now? Sector 4. The Great West. The Shawnee. Confidences. Lesson 22, lines 1078 to 1164. What are Amorphas? Why describe thus this territory? Who were Ishmael's children? Why bring out clearly the many dangers to be encountered here? What is Fata Morgana? Who was the anchorite monk? Why taciturn? How could they follow his footsteps? Who were they? How were traces of sorrow and patience visible? Were they unusually touched by the Shawnee's story? Why? Was it natural for Evangeline and the Shawnee to be drawn together? What common bond had they? What was the effect of Evangeline's story? Were the Shawnee stories appropriate? Were they comforting or disheartening? What was the snake that crept into Evangeline's thoughts? Was it lasting? What would naturally dispel it? Are people more brave at night or in the morning? More cheerful when? Why? At the mission. Waiting. Lesson 23, lines 1165 to 1205. Why black-robed chief? Why expect good tidings at the mission? What is a rural chapel? What were vespers and sessuras? What was the cause of the priest's pleasure? Look up Jesuit work in North America. Why were the priest's words like snow flakes to Evangeline? How did Evangeline receive the news? Why should she desire to remain at the mission rather than return to Basil's home? Was there an unselfish purpose in her remaining? A long search. Age. Lesson 24, lines 1206 to 1291. How long did Evangeline remain at the mission? What old custom referred to in lines 1212 to 1214? What do you know of old husking bees? Who urged patience? The compass flower illustrates what truth? Why is life in a true sense pathless and limitless? What quality is suggested by the gay, luxuriant flower? By the humble plant? Evangeline leaves the mission to seek Gabriel where? Result? How did she spend the following years? Would you think from the text here her life was wholly given to the thought of Gabriel and to search for him? Why? What was the dawn of another life? Section V. Devotion. Lesson 25, lines 1252 to 1297. Why was Penn an apostle? What city did he found? How do the streets echo the names of the forest? Who are the Dryads? Why did she feel at home here? Does she finally give up hope? Explain lines 1270 to 1275. What made the world look bright to her? Does one's state of mind determine to a large extent how the world looks? Does the world look the same at night and in the morning? When are we most likely to see it as it is? Was Gabriel forgotten? What were the lessons her life had taught her? What became of her love? How did she act practically upon her feeling? What was the word or the thing that drew her? She shows what quality 1291 to 1293? What is a sister of mercy? Why had she not joined the order before? Had she in a true sense been a sister of mercy before joining the order? Do you think she regretted the long struggle that fitted her so well for this work? The pestilence. Lesson 26, lines 1298 to 1342. How did death flood life? What made the lake brackish? Why Silver Stream? What is the usual cause of a pestilence? Why call it a scourge of his anger? Where was the almshouse? Where is the spot now? This was an opportunity for whom? What was the appearance of the sister? What occasioned it? Is what we are written in our faces? What morning did she visit the almshouse? In what season? Had she a premonition that her quest was ended? Are premonitions common? What was the effect of this feeling upon her? Why was death a consoler? The meeting. Lesson 27, lines 1343 to 1400. White expecting something, was Evangeline prepared for the meeting? How did it affect her? How did Gabriel appear? What was the cause? What is the reference about sprinkling the portals? What was Gabriel's condition? What effect had the cry of Evangeline? Did he recognize Evangeline and realize she was with him? What came to his mind? Did he finally recognize Evangeline? Was this recognition a blessing for her? What effect had this meeting upon her? How did she express it? Where are the lovers supposed to be now? Do you think Evangeline's life ended here? Scene shifts to where? What has occurred? Does the author state that those old scenes of Acadian life can now be seen? Where? In lines 1399 to 1400, is there any suggestion as to this story? No doubt, it would be well at the conclusion of this study to spend 1 or 2 periods in going over the story as a whole, that the poem, in its general outline, may be better retained in the pupil's mind. Composition subjects: 1. Acadian life. Contrast with present. 2. The notary. 3. Character of Gabriel. 4. Character of Evangeline. 5. The betrothal feast. 6. The scene on the shore. 7. On the river. Compare mode of traveling with present ones by land and water. 8. Home of Basil. Contrast with the home in Acadia. 9. The mission. 10. The search and its reward. Select the lines that appeal to you most. Select the lines that show the most beautiful sentiment. Select the lines that contain the best pictures. Part 3. Spelling and defining. The work of spelling and defining may be carried on with the study of the text of the poem, or at the conclusion of this study. In the former case, allow a week or more to pass after using a selection as a reading lesson before studying it as a spelling lesson, that the reading may not degenerate into a word study. The words selected are those which should form a part of the pupil's vocabulary. The fact that the context largely determines the meaning of a word should be made clear in this study, and the particular meaning the author employs in the poem should be required. The pupil's discrimination will at first be poor, but he soon develops considerable skill and judgment. 1. Primeval 2. Druids 3. ELD 4. Prophetic 5. Horror 6. Cavern 7. Disconsolate 8. Row 9. Glida 10. Reflecting 11. Adopt 12. Tradition 13. Affliction 14. Endures 15. Patient 2. 1. Incessant 2. Floodgates 3. Repose 4. Peasants 5. Thatch 6. Tranquil 7. Veins 8. Distaffs 9. Gossiping 10. Reverend 11. Hailing 12. Serenely 13. Belfry 14. Incense 15. Contentment 3. 1. Stalworth 2. Stately 3. Gleamed 4. Tresses 5. Sooth 6. Turret 7. Hyssop 8. Chaplet 9. Missal 10. Generations 11. Ethereal 12. Confession 13. Benediction 14. Exquisite 15. Envy 4. 1. Antique 2. Penitent 3. Odorous 4. Meek 5. Innocent 6. Variant 7. Devotion 8. Craft 9. Repute 10. Pedagogue 11. Autumnal 12. Expired 13. Populous 14. Wondrous 15. Valiant v. 1. Desolate 2. Tropical 3. Inclement 4. Mantles 5. Hoarded 6. Advent 7. Pious 8. Magical 9. Landscape 10. Consoled 11. Blended 12. Subdued 13. Arrayed 14. Adorned 15. Surmises 6. 1. Instinct 2. Superbly 3. Ponderous 4. Gestures 5. Fantastic 6. Fragments 7. Carols 8. Treadles 9. Diligent 10. Monotonous 11. Jovial 12. Content 13. Accustomed 14. Forebodings 15. Mandate 7. 1. Untimely 2. Blighted 3. Bursting 4. Lurk 5. Outskirts 6. Anxious 7. Dubious 8. Scythe 9. Besieged 10. Contract N. 11. Glebe 12. Inkhorn 13. Rejoice 14. Worthy 15. Notary 8. 1. Floss 2. Wisdom 3. Supernal 4. Languished 5. Warrior 6. Ripe 7. Unchristened 8. Doom 9. Haunt 10. Marvelous 11. Lore 12. Demeanor 13. Molest 14. Irascible 15. Triumphs 9. 1. Brazen 2. Emblem 3. Presided 4. Corrupted 5. Oppressed 6. Condemned 7. Convinced 8. Congealed 9. Tankard 10. Dower 11. Contention 12. Maneuver 13. Pallid 14. Infinite 15. Breach X 1. Anon 2. Curfew 3. Straightway 4. Lingered 5. Rain 6. Resounded 7. Luminous 8. Ample 9. Spacious 10. Dower 11. Mellow 12. Tremulous 13. Serenely 14. Flitted 15. Abraham 11. 1. Clamorous 2. Hamlets 3. Holiday 4. Blithe 5. Jocund 6. Greensward 7. Thronged 8. Hospitality 9. Betrothal 10. Waistcoats 11. Alternately 12. Embers 13. Vibrant 14. Mingled 15. Noblest 12. 1. Sonorous 2. Garlands 3. Sacred 4. Dissonant 5. Clangor 6. Convened 7. Clement 8. Grievous 9. Forfeited 10. Transported 11. Wail 12. Imprecations 13. Distorted 14. Allegiance 15. Merciless 13. 1. Chancel 2. Mean 3. Odd 4. Clamorous 5. Solemn 6. Accents 7. Vigils 8. Profane 9. Compassion 10. Assail 11. Rebuke 12. Contrition 13. Fervent 14. Translated 15. Ardor 14. 1. Mysterious 2. Splendor 3. Emblazoned 4. Ambrosial 5. Celestial 6. Charity 7. Emotion 8. Meekness 9. Gloomier 10. Tenantless 11. Haunted 12. Phantoms 13. Echoed 14. Disconsolate 15. Keenly 15. 1. Confusion 2. Thither 3. Thronged 4. Imprisoned 5. Wayworn 6. Foremost 7. Inexhaustible 8. Sacred 9. Strength 10. Submission 11. Affliction 12. Procession 13. Approached 14. Wayside 15. Mischances 16. 1. Consoling 2. Haggard 3. Caresses 4. Unperturbed 5. Mortal 6. Titan-like 7. Quivering 8. Martyr 9. Dismay 10. Anguish 11. Dawn 12. Skirt v. 13. Aspect 14. Affrighted 15. Nethermost 17. 1. Overwhelmed 2. Terror 3. Wailed 4. Sultry 5. Bleak 6. Despairing 7. Extended 8. Desert 9. Extinguished 10. Consumed 11. Incomplete 12. Lingered 13. Rumor 14. Hearsay 15. Inarticulate 18. 1. Freighted 2. Exile 3. Asunder 4. Swoon 5. Oblivious 6. Trance 7. Multitude 8. Pallid 9. Compassion 10. Landscape 11. Senses 12. Sacred 13. Glare 14. Dirges 15. Embarking 19. 1. Voyageur 2. Loyal 3. Tedious 4. Tresses 5. Serenely 6. Illumined 7. Confession 8. Enrich 9. Refreshments 10. Endurance 11. Perfected 12. Rendered 13. Labored 14. Despair 15. SAV. XX. 1. Cumbrous 2. Kith 3. Kin 4. Fewacred 5. Somber 6. Turbulence 7. Shoots 8. Emerged 9. Lagoons 10. Wimpling 11. Luxuriant 12. Perpetual 13. Citron 14. Bayou 15. Sluggish 21. 1. Corridors 2. Multitudinous 3. Reverberant 4. Mysterious 5. Grim 6. Myriad 7. Resplendent 8. Sylvan 9. Suspended 10. Moored 11. Travelers 12. Extended 13. Pendulous 14. Flitted 15. Regions 22. 1. Countenance 2. Legibly 3. Oblivion 4. Screen 5. Trance 6. Vague 7. Superstition 8. Revealed 9. Credulous 10. Reverend 11. Idle 12. Buoy 13. Betrays 14. Illusions 15. Eden 23. 1. Magician 2. Wand 3. Landscape 4. Mingled 5. Inexpressible 6. Delirious 7. Plaintive 8. Roaring 9. Revel 10. Frenzied 11. Bacchantes 12. Lamentation 13. Derision 14. Prelude 15. Amber 24. 1. Garlands 2. Mystic 3. Flaunted 4. Yuletide 5. Girded 6. Luxuriant 7. Spacious 8. Symbol 9. Limitless 10. Cordage 11. Arrayed 12. Adverse 13. Vent 14. Misgivings 15. Embarrassed 25. 1. Mortals 2. Renowned 3. Triumphal 4. Enraptured 5. Hilarious 6. Marveled 7. Ci-devant 8. Domains 9. Patriarchal 10. Dispensed 11. Profusion 12. Congeals 13. Plowshare 14. Accordant 15. Melodious 26. 1. Entranced 2. Irrepressible 3. Devious 4. Manifold 5. Carthusian 6. Inundate 7. Indefinable 8. Measureless 9. Marvel 10. Comet 11. Oracular 12. Anointed 13. Delicious 14. Fasting 15. Famine 27. 1. Perpetual 2. Jagged 3. Gorge 4. Emigrant 5. Precipitate 6. Ceaseless 7. Vibrations 8. Amorphous 9. Blast 10. Blight 11. Pinions 12. Implacable 13. Scaling 14. Taciturn 15. Anchorite 23. 1. Venison 2. Companions 3. Swarthy 4. Reverses 5. Compassion 6. Mute 7. Dissolving 8. Weird 9. Incantation 10. Phantom 11. Enchanted 12. Enchantress 13. Somber 14. Audible 15. Indefinite 29. 1. Towering 2. Crucifix 3. Rural 4. Chapel 5. Intricate 6. Aerial 7. Vespers 8. Sword 9. Benignant 10. Wigwam 11. Mother tongue 12. Chase sen 13. Submissive 14. Afflicted 15. Betimes. Triple X. 1. Interlacing 2. Mendicant 3. Granaries 4. Pillage 5. Vigorous 6. Magnet 7. Suspended 8. Fragile 9. Limitless 10. Luxuriant 11. Fragrance 12. Hue 13. Perilous 14. Divers 15. Dawn 31. 1. Sylvan 2. Apostle 3. Bomb 4. Emblem 5. Fane 6. Appease 7. Haunts 8. Molested 9. Descendants 10. Hamlets 11. Illumined 12. Transfigured 13. Abnegation 14. Diffused 15. Aroma 33. 1. Pestilence 2. Presage 3. Knot 4. Brackish 5. Margin 6. Oppressor 7. Scourge 8. Splendor 9. Wending 10. Corridors 11. Intermingled 12. Assiduous 13. Palates 14. Languid 15. Consola 34. 1. Flowerets 2. Terrible 3. Anguish 4. Assumed 5. Portal 6. Exhausted 7. Infinite 8. Reverberations 9. Sylvan 10. Vanished 11. Vainly 12. Humble 13. Ebbing 14. Throbbing 15. Customs. Transcriber's notes. 1. The poem has been compared with another version already on Gutenberg, Evangeline 10. Where the two disagreed, this text was carefully rechecked to ensure the text and punctuation matched those on the scanned image. 2. The following apparent errors in the source text were corrected. Poem line 73 Blessings changed to blessings. 346 Maneuver. The OE ligature was split. 668 Goods changed to gods. 692 Full stop added to line end. 718 Father Confessor, hyphen added. 840 There changed to there. 850 Reverned changed to Reverend. 909 Spar changed to spars. 909 Tropsis changed to tropics. 1083 River changed to river. 1256 Reecho changed to reecho. 2. Line 713 has been copied and inserted from Evangeline 10. This was missing in the book, but was referenced in the notes. The line numbering also showed a missing line between 710 and 715. 3. No other deliberate changes have made to the poem. There remain a number of minor word and punctuation differences between this and Evangeline 10. 4. Special characters. A number of characters used in the notes to describe pronunciation do not exist in ASCII. The following conventions have been used to represent them. Equals a plus macron, a with a horizontal line above. Equals o plus macron, o with a horizontal line above. Equals e plus macron, e with a horizontal line above. A with a curved line above like horns. E with a curved line above like horns. A with a single dot above. End of Project Gutenberg's Evangeline, by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.